Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. You are in for a real treat today. This is a long conversation with a woman whom you've likely never heard of before, but I can guarantee you will want to meet and hang out with her after you listen to this episode. I'm not sure if it's her accent, which is beyond charming, or it's her self-deprecating way, or it's her keen observations about herself and others. It's actually probably a combination of all of those. But whatever it is, you're going to be pulled into a conversation that is just going to make you feel good, and hopefully it's going to make you think differently about what's possible for yourself. So this conversation is with Sue Hollis. Sue is an Australian, but she currently splits her time between the land down under and Canada. It was my very good fortune that she happened to be in Canada this summer and was willing to take a ride down here to Seattle on her beloved motorcycle, Voodoo, as she calls it, to record. Anyway, Sue just released a book called Riding Raw: The Journey from Empty to Full, which chronicles her 3-month ride through North America. And mostly that was in the Western U.S. and in parts of Canada. And this was on her 1000cc BMW Superbike. Now, as a rider myself, I can attest to the fact that 1000 cc's is a big bike, especially for a petite woman like Sue. But she took on this big trip after feeling like her quote-unquote perfect world wasn't so perfect, and she needed a drastic change to reclaim her life and find what she calls heart success. She really has a wonderful story to tell about her rise in the corporate travel world and how she always felt that she was going to be found out as a fraud at what she was doing. And that feeling came with a lot of stress and fear for many, many years. Now, she went on to build a multi-million-dollar business, but she still felt empty. Now, hence the subtitle of the book, Empty to Full. As you can imagine, she's got some great stories to tell, not only about her past life in her career, but also about her journey on Voodoo. And there are great lessons in here for all of us, not just unhappy corporate execs or motorcycle riders. Some of the lessons she shares are really accessible to us all. And that's probably what makes this conversation so much fun and interesting. Okay, before we get to that, you know the drill. If you're not already a subscriber to the podcast, please stop what you're doing and make sure you're subscribed in whatever app or platform you're using to listen to this. Then tell a friend about this podcast in general or this particular episode. Did you know word of mouth is the number one way that people hear about podcasts? Yep. So it's up to you to help me get the word out. Ladies can join our Be Bold Facebook group, where we have a community of over 2,600 women who share their bold moves or just look for encouragement from others. As always, you can find links to things we talk about in the show notes at BeBoldPodcast.com. Finally, I'd love to hear your feedback. Send me a note at Beth@BeBoldPodcast.com and let me know what you think. You can also leave voice feedback or ask a question by calling 877-280-5170. That number will be in the show notes as well. I'd love to grow our community by featuring you and your questions on a future show. So with that, here's my conversation with Sue Hollis. You said that you ended up staying here in West Seattle at a little bed and breakfast.
Yeah, I did a little Airbnb just down the road.
It was an Airbnb. Yeah, how did you find it? Just on the Airbnb site?
Yeah, just on the Airbnb site. And I've got to say, it was, I'd planned to stay in a big city hotel, as you do. And something must be happening in Seattle at the moment because they were all full. So I think that was the universe saying, actually stay somewhere really beautiful and quiet. So, but it's the most stunning place, and I had the complete view of the harbour all night. I had just a little deck, and so I went to, there's a gorgeous market across the road, picked up some fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, and just literally sat on the deck with some kombucha and just watched the sunset, and it was just divine.
Was it a spectacular sunset last night? Was it kind of red?
It had, it was one of those, because we were facing, forgive me, I'm geographically challenged.
Yeah.
Facing the other way that the sun doesn't go down, but you could see the reflection on the buildings.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, it must have been facing east.
So you were facing east.
Yes, thank you.
We've had fires that have been blowing down, the smoke has been blowing down from Canada, I think.
Yeah, it has.
And creating on a clear day. Today, we've had spectacular weather for the past few weeks, but today it's misty out and totally gray. But we've had these amazing sunrises and sunsets because this smoke is coming in and just making it spectacular.
Yeah, the colours are just beautiful, but it was one of those where, the sun was reflecting on I could see the city in front of me. The buildings were just reflecting that gorgeous orange glow. I was watching the ferries kind of coming in and out and, with a pink sky and just thinking, this is as good as it gets.
Yeah, it is pretty spectacular. One of the most amazing sunrises I think I've ever seen, there's been a lot of them, but one that comes to mind actually happened in Sydney. And I remember being up for that sunrise and, because it's so much closer to the equator, that the sunrises and sunsets seem to take a lot longer. And I remember sitting and watching this sunrise, spectacular red, just the colors going across the sky and just watching the sun come up on a morning. So it brings me right back to Sydney, which is your hometown kind of part of the time. Is that right?
Kind of part of the time. Well, I am from Sydney. But I guess I'm really fortunate in this world that I've got one son that, or maybe not fortunate as a mother, but I have one son that lives in Whistler and he's a Canadian resident now. So he's based in Whistler full time, and one son that's just finished university in Sydney, and a husband in the middle who is a very understanding man and appreciates that I'm very close to both my boys.
So you have a worldly family.
We have a worldly family. Well, my husband's a geologist, so he travels a lot. I mean, he's often in bizarre places that I can't spell.
Where is he now?
So he's just got back in Sydney, but he's been in Kyrgyzstan recently. So, so he goes off and looks at coal and looks at gold and explores the world. And so that gives me the opportunity, I think, since I still have a business in Sydney that I own, but I've been fortunate enough to have put a CEO in there and she runs it for me. So that gives me the opportunity to spend time with both of my sons and to kind of explore a new life of adventure.
Yeah. Do you have a regular schedule on a yearly basis of the time that you spend in Canada? For example, do you come up here for the summers and then you go to Sydney in what would be the North American winter? So you're back down there in the summertime?
It kind of comes and goes depending on what I'm doing. I mean, I try not to have back-to-back winters because that gets a little, that's a little stressful on the emotions. But I really love kind of I tend to try and spend Christmas back in Australia because I still have all my family there. So I tend to plan, to be there at December. Then, January, February, March, scoot out for some skiing in Whistler, which is just stunning. And, and I come out every day. And even if I just ski for a couple of hours in the morning, for me, I just literally come out and just, appreciate how blessed I am to be able to do that. And then I'll go home kind of, April, May, June. In Sydney, then I'm back, into Canada for the summer because, there's as much as I adore Sydney and as much as I adore Australia and I guess it will always be home, but realistically for me, I've discovered my kind of real joy and my energy comes from being in the mountains. So being able to hike, to walk, even just to kind of walk into the trees, and you can't go past a big tree in Canada. So, just being in that environment, I mean, for me, it's just so soul soothing. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, that is. Are you still trying to run your business once you're up in Canada, or do you just put that behind you and you really have somebody who's just managing the company in Australia?
I mean, I started my business about 18 years ago with a business partner. And about 3 years ago, I decided that as much as I love my company and I love my people, I hated my job. It was a very tricky process with my business partner. I seem to be surrounded by very understanding men. And as difficult as it was, he appreciated that, I needed to do something else. So his job was very much strategy. Mine was very much the day-to-day operation of the business. And there are 5 separate businesses in it. So it's, it's a...
And we'll get into that a little bit later, but just the more specifics about it, because I'm really interested in it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to interrupt you there, but I just want to let you know there'll be definitely time because I'm very interested in what that business model is.
Well, we put an amazing CEO in, and so she runs the business, and I check in on a monthly and a quarterly basis, so we have catch-ups. But apart from that, I just let them do what they do best, and I'm just in the process now of actually setting up a coaching business. So I feel really passionately about all the experiences I've had in this world, and I kind of figure that there's no point having the experiences if you don't share them. But the coaching business now allows me to have incredible flexibility because I can coach from all around the world.
With clients from all over the world,
Exactly.
too.
Yeah.
So we're here chatting because you just had a book come out. And by the time this airs, your book will be out. So we're here to talk about the book that you've just written and that has just come out. Tell us about it. The title is Riding Raw, The Journey from Empty to Full. And give me just a little synopsis of it right now. And then I want to hear the backstory about what led into that trip. So the book is about?
Well, the book, I mean, the underlying story in the book is it is the journey from empty to full. So, I mean, it literally was, what do you do when you wake up one day and you have everything that kind of is classed as success? So, have the big career, the big house, all the toys, amazing financial stability, crazy adventures in your world, and you wake up and you go, is this all it is? And Riding Raw is the journey to answer that question. So for me, it was, I knew I needed space. I've always been a motorbike rider. And I needed space in my helmet to go and keep journeying on my motorbike until I could find the answer to, is this all there is? And that's the story in Riding Raw.
And what was the journey?
So the journey was I bought a BMW motorbike, an S1000RR, and for anyone that doesn't understand motorbikes, that's a race bike. So it's not what you would traditionally call a typical touring
bike. Yeah. No. And it's a big bike too.
And it's a big bike. It's the fastest production bike in the world. So generally, S1000RR and touring are not two words that generally go together. But, if you're going to tour, why spoil the habit of a lifetime? I wanted fast and I've raced. So I bought my bike, and her name is Voodoo because she's dark and mysterious and she'll bite you if you don't behave on her. And together we set off. We left Whistler, and for the next 3 months we journeyed together through Canada, but primarily through the states. So literally, I think it was 13, 14 states. So Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. So we did a huge Pacific Northwest loop and ended back up in Whistler 3 months later.
I bet that was gorgeous.
Amazing.
We'll get into some of those details. So the book has just come out, but the story of that and you having to kind of take off on this big journey goes back quite a bit, and kind of how you built your life. And what I want to do, because I had read and I know from our conversation that you had started out thinking that you might go into law, and you actually went to law school. And I think you said halfway through you just put an end to that to go travel. What was that experience like? Well, first, why did you think that you needed to go into law?
It's one of those things, isn't it? Firstly, I had spent time with a school counselor, and she gave me some amazing advice. She said, "Oh, you like reading, you'd make a great librarian." And I would be the world's worst librarian. I mean, my attention to detail is shocking. I mean, I'd still be looking for books 30 years later. So that was never going to work for me. But I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I thought law sounded impressive. And to be honest, that's the reason that I did it. It's like, oh, well, lawyers are, they're well regarded in society, or maybe they were. And it just sounded like an impressive career. So I started law purely on that basis.
It wasn't your family urging you to do that, to have some big, grand, successful career.
No, it's interesting because it's I think my family is still surprised to this day, in terms of what I've achieved, because I think they were never, as amazing, as incredible as they are, they never kind of expected us to achieve big things or to have big goals. I mean,
did you grow up in Sydney?
Yeah, Sydney mainly, yeah. But, I kind of, their expectation for me was, to literally not necessarily even go to college or university, but just, get a job, settle down, have a family.
Had your parents gone to college?
No. So,
so low expectations.
Yeah, not even an expectation. Even when I come back, and it was just that I would be a good person and I would do things, and good luck with that. It wasn't that they weren't supportive. It was just that, they were not goal-driven themselves.
Well, I don't come from a family that was super goal-driven, but we live in a culture in America. We live in a culture that's there's a lot of pressure to perform and to be goal-driven. Would you say that that in Australia it's much more of a relaxed lifestyle, and that your families, the way that they raised you was more along the lines of the Australian values, or was that just happened to be, I'm reading too much into it, and that just happened to be the way your family was?
I think, and I'm kind of old-ish.
How old are you?
58.
Oh, yay.
Oh. And so I think, certainly kind of back then, I think there was an expectation. My parents kind of came from tough backgrounds, worked incredibly hard, and achieved good success. So I think their whole value system was, you just work hard and whatever comes your way is great. I think that's changed a lot. Certainly I know when I look at my sons and the kind of the culture in Australia now, it is very, very aligned to the US, which is, you have to go to college, you have to get a degree. And as a parent, that was actually something that I had to learn to come to grips with when I actually have a son that, there was no way in the world he was going to be, he had a learning challenge. There was no way in the world he would actually be able to go through university. No, he didn't. And, and as a parent, that was an incredible journey for me because, and I know we're kind of probably going off on a tangent, but, you hold this little person in your arms when they're small and you think, what are they going to be able to achieve? Are they going to cure cancer? Are they going to, solve the Middle East peace challenges? And then you have these incredible expectations for a child. And then all of a sudden you realize, actually, I'm going to have to readjust that. And for me, particularly with my son Jakey on the learning challenges that he had to learn that it was his journey, not mine. And to be able to recognize that and let go of that whole, he has to finish high school, he has to, it's SATs, it's university, or he's going to be nothing. So, for me, that was an incredible learning opportunity because our culture is very now aligned with the States and, our kids in Australia are under that same incredible pressure.
Do you have an observation of that, whether that is good or bad, or an opinion of that?
I do, having been on the other side of it. So very briefly, my son Jakey had a learning challenge. So he had a cognitive learning issue, which meant that learning...
Was there a name for it, or is it just kind of under a general umbrella?
Yeah, it's under a general umbrella. I mean, effectively what happened was, he struggled. He loved to read, but he struggled to read. And he literally couldn't comprehend anything that he read. So, it was okay when he was at school up until he was about, in primary school, because most of the learning there was rote. After that, then when you get to high school or secondary school, the gap between what he could do and what he was required to do became exponential.
Because it's more critical thinking and it's
exactly.
comprehensive.
Exactly. Yeah. And he did not have that capability. And so, so for me, it was always about, giving him options, understanding that he was never, or believing that he was never going to be able to go to university. And so then it became, about giving him options. And it was and we tried everything with him. If we tried occupational therapist, speech therapist, every bit of new research I could get, I put this poor child through. And to be honest, if they'd said to us, look, stick him upside down in a bucket of manure, I would have tried that.
Was he in a regular school?
He was in a regular school and he was struggling and he was working so hard. And I was watching my beautiful, cheeky, funny child disintegrate in front of me.
Because he was struggling so much.
Not able to keep up intellectually with his peers.
So do you think that, and maybe you're getting to this, so I apologize, but do you think that if that pressure had been taken off of him, that the cheeky, fun-loving child might have blossomed more as a cheeky, fun-loving person?
I think the answer is yes, but I think the challenge is that while ever we as a society, Australia and North America, while ever we hold success equated to academic achievement, that's never going to be possible. And that was the challenge. We started to see that he was incredibly creative. He could do things, but you can't measure creativity. So you can't evaluate creativity. So you can't put him on a scale. And unfortunately, that is the only evaluation that we give our children. And that was again, another lesson for me. We were really fortunate. We discovered an incredible school in Vancouver called Arrowsmith. It's actually a Toronto-based school, which does nothing but address cognitive function. So, I found this school. We discovered it. They literally had one spot left. It was, it was in 6 weeks, starting in Vancouver, and I grabbed the spot, called my husband and said, we need to chat because I think, we're moving to Vancouver. And we did. The boys and I, Robbie, my husband, stayed in Sydney. We cross-commuted for 2 years while Jakey went to this incredible school to address his cognitive learning and healed it completely.
No kidding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why isn't that being replicated elsewhere? Why is it just this? Did you say it was just the one school that has this?
Well, they started off. So effectively what happened, I'd read a book and it was an amazing book and it's called The Brain That Heals Itself and it's by Norman Doidge. And it's stories about, it's based on the philosophy of neuroplasticity, which is you can rewire your brain. So the old traditional philosophy was the brain that you have is the brain that you've got, and good luck with that. But neuroplasticity is about you can completely rewire your brain. So this was a collection of stories about people that had successfully addressed, stroke issues and learning issues. And I got to chapter 2, and it was about this amazing woman called Barbara Arrowsmith. And as I'm reading her learning challenges, as I'm telling you now, I can still feel the shivers in my spine. I'm going, that's my son. And through luck, good management, and a bunch of opportunities, she was able to understand what was causing her learning problem, and she addressed it and then started these schools. So she runs a program called Arrowsmith. She's been running for about 30 years, and so the head office was in Toronto. So when I read this story, I called Toronto and they said, look, we're full, call Vancouver. I called Vancouver. So she does have schools. It was primarily in Canada. They're now in the States. We now actually have them in Australia. We brought them to Australia.
Okay, great.
And they had one spot, and it started in 6 weeks, and we grabbed it, and Jakey went there, and for 2 years did no academic, nothing. Because when you have a cognitive disorder, it's like having a sieve. There's no point putting, academic work into the sieve because it's just pouring out until you block the holes. So effectively what this program did was it completely rewired his brain. He discovered this incredible talent for photography and for film and cinematography, came back to Australia, went to film school, found a company in North America, in Whistler, that he loved their work. He harassed them for an internship. He said, look, I'll come and do anything. I just want to learn from you guys. You guys are the best. And they were really kind to him. They went, yeah, nice kid. He sent them his final piece from film school, and they said, you start next week.
No kidding. As an intern, or they hired him?
Yeah, he started as an intern, and they said, look, we'll give you 3 months. But after 10 days, they went, oh my gosh, we're keeping you.
Really?
And he worked with them for 4 years and has now just started up his own production company.
What a great success story.
Yeah.
That is crazy and dedicated and sad and inspiring for me. It breaks my heart that, thank goodness that you had the time and the wherewithal to do the research and to find this school. And these kinds of things make me so angry and sad that these things are not more available to people. And for the, let's just say, average mom or family member who doesn't have time, who's out working 9 to 5 and maybe more to feed their family and to take care of their kids, just to put food on the table, and they don't have the ability to do all this research. And maybe this is just a new enough thing that you caught it at the early stage, the school, you caught it at an early stage of building, and maybe there's more communities and online, maybe there's forums where people can find this information out and be able to send their kids to something like this. But it just seems so crazy to me that you had to work really hard to make it happen, and that the average person doesn't have access to something like this.
No, and it is, we were very fortunate because, I had flexibility in my role, although, my business partner was great because he just said, okay, run the business remotely. So it was literally on Skype 8 hours a day, but we were in a financial position to be able to make that investment. And it was a big investment. And, there are days when I look at my son now when he's hanging out of a helicopter filming, a commercial for Audi, for example. And it literally takes my breath away because I just think how close we came to him completely disintegrating, and how fortunate we were to have found the solution for him. And I know what it feels like to be a parent and to be in that space. And it is the blackest hole. It came to a crunch where he came into me one day and he was working so hard, and he was little at the time. He's not, he's huge now, but he just put his little arms around my neck and he just said, I can't do this anymore. You have to find a solution. And I remember putting him to bed and saying, it'll be fine, we'll sort it. And huddling on the floor, just in tears. I had no idea what to do. And to watch your child slowly implode in front of you, like you said, it's just terrifying. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's how you got to Canada. And it's a big success story for your son,
all
too.
Around.
Yeah, that
absolutely.
is great. So going back then, living in Sydney with your family, not big aspirations, or encouragement from your lovely parents.
Nope.
I'm sure they meant very well.
Yeah.
But you got yourself into law school. And then what happened? What was the epiphany in law school?
I hated every minute of it.
That would be an epiphany. Yeah, for sure.
That's probably enough to push you over the edge.
Yeah.
I hated every minute of it. And I just thought, what am I doing? I'm doing this because it sounds good.
How long were you there?
6 months. That was enough. I thought, I'm doing this because it sounds good. It's not my passion. It doesn't feel right. And I literally kind of walked out of university, resigned, and went and booked a ticket and went to Europe. And that was it. That was my love. Became my love affair with travel.
How long did it take you from walking away from law school, like literally making the decision and booking your ticket?
3 weeks.
Okay. And then what made you decide that it was travel that you wanted to do? Had that always been kind of lingering there for you?
No, not at all. And but Australia, we live so far away in Australia, so that when we travel for a long period of time.
You travel big.
Yeah, we go big. So I literally just went for the typical Australian experience. I just decided to go for a couple of years and see where that took me. And, it took me all over Europe and in some crazy jobs, as a deckhand on, I now know, a gun runner's boat in Antibes. I didn't at the time. But you're very naive when you're 20. It seems like such a good idea and, it was exciting. So I spent a couple of years traveling through Europe and working crazy jobs and came back and thought, I just love this business. I love the energy. I love the excitement. I love, the connectivity, meeting people. And I figured if I wanted to keep traveling, then I needed someone else to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I started working for a travel company. I managed to bluff my way into a job and started working for a travel company. And
what was the travel company?
It was a company called Newmans. It was a New Zealand wholesale company. And I applied for a job as a New Zealand consultant with zero experience. And in those days, we were still typing. I couldn't even type. And I happened to find a beautiful mentor in my then-to-be boss who interviewed me and then sent me for a typing test, which was just
which you failed.
Abysmal. Oh, my gosh. Even when I think about it now, I'm still embarrassed. And it was a long time ago. And I remember him looking at the results of my test, and I thought, that's it, I'm gone. And he said, it was a cold morning. You must have had very cold fingers. I'm sure when it warms up, you'll be better. Bless him. So he gave me my first job in travel and we kind of just went from there.
Was it a personality thing that he thought, I think she'll,
absolutely.
I think she'll be a good fit here.
Absolutely.
And, why not?
Yeah. And I think as with, I've been really fortunate that I've had, 3 or 4 incredible mentors in my life. And I think they've all done the same thing. They've seen something in me that I haven't seen in myself. I do kind of joke about the fact that they've all subsequently had their eyes tested. But as good mentors do, they kind of see potential and help you realize it. And, and this gentleman, John DeSteiger, certainly did that for me.
So that was at Newmans.
That was Newmans.
And then you took a bigger leap, a bigger job. Were you at Qantas? Is that right?
So, yeah, I worked at Newmans for a little while and then got into wholesaling. So I started writing, doing wholesale brochures. So, for a company so I did ski brochures and things like that. Then I worked for hotels. And then I remember, back in the old days when you used to see job advertisements in the paper, that's how old I am. I remember looking, flicking one Saturday morning and seeing the perfect job. And it was a estate manager for British Airways. And I remember reading all the qualifications and everything that they needed. And I had none of them. None. Not even one. And I remember looking at the ad thinking, if I could have any job in the world, that would be the job. And I remember showing it to my husband. He said, apply. And I went, I've got nothing to lose. So I applied and, astounded myself and just about everyone I knew, and again found a mentor that saw something in me. And within about 6 weeks later, there I was, kind of running the State Department for British Airways for sales and operations.
Now, you write in your book about feeling every day like an imposter. Was that the job that you were talking about?
That was where it started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about that because I don't know, because it seemed to me the way you described it in the book, it seemed like it was a very deep-seated, very real, visceral feeling that you had. I think you talk about every morning that you went in, you figured that was the day that they were going to finally find you out and fire you. And when you left at night, you kind of had that same feeling. And how many years did you have that job?
I was there in New South Wales for about 3 years, and then British Airways transferred me to London. But, but that feeling continued.
But I don't know how a person, if it is, and I'm not doubting you, but if it is as deep-seated as you describe, how does a person function with so much self-doubt in a position like that? Because having a position, and I can have you describe what that position was, but even having any kind of a job, it seems like, or a job with responsibility particularly, that there has to be some level of confidence that you know what you're doing. So how do you bring in that deep-seated imposter, that feeling of being an imposter?
It's one of those things where I literally was given this job. And so out of I had never managed people before. And all of a sudden I was managing a team of 15 people. I was 26, I think. The average age of my team was 45. They were all hardened airline people. I didn't know the front of an aircraft from the back, and they worked that out pretty quickly. So I'd never managed people. I didn't understand.
But did they work that out quickly and give you a hard time about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I see.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they, you can imagine when you're 45, you've been in the airline business for 20 years. A 26-year-old, upstart comes in that knows nothing, absolutely zero. They were not happy with that, and I understand that. And and my boss again had, just kind of had belief in me that he brought me in as a change maker. So I think, so he brought me in to say, okay, well, you don't need to have had 20 years airline experience to be able to come and run an airline or to do this job. What you need is enthusiasm, energy, a new way of looking at things.
Too bad you don't have any of that.
Sorry, but we're going to put you in anyway.
Yeah.
And his whole vision was to really shake things up, because he just went, we need new blood, we need new energy, we want new ways of looking at things. And he actually said to me, if you're making mistakes, if you're not making mistakes, he said, good when you do good stuff. If you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing hard enough. You're not testing, you're not putting yourself out of your comfort zone. I need you to do that. And that was really handy because I was completely out of my comfort zone. And Beth, it's actually a terrifying experience. People used to come in and they'd ask me to make decisions on something. And I think, why are they asking me? And then they'd go out and I think, it's because I'm the boss. And it's just terrifying. And although I had, I think, the inner strength to kind of hold it out externally and to kind of step outside of this office, I'd never had an office before. I'd be lucky to have a chair in any of my old jobs. But to be able to kind of come out to the office and, kind of hold it together. I mean, I'm reasonably intelligent. I can make things happen. I can work stuff out. I've got good street, smarts. But I didn't have the experience. He didn't want the experience. He wanted all that.
Well, how did that work out for you in the ensuing years? Did you win over the trust of the 45-year-olds?
Yeah, you know what, we did. And it was incredible. And I think, for me, again, just, on a leadership learning, although I'd never led people, I simply worked on the philosophy that, people just want to be treated as you would treat yourself. So if you treat them with respect, and I was very honest, and I would say to them, help me understand this. You've got the experience in this. Let me learn from you.
That does help win people over when you're honest like that.
It does. And it was difficult because there's a fine line between honesty and overexposing yourself from a vulnerability perspective, because I didn't want them, going home, throwing their hands up in the air going, what have we been given? Who is this fruitcake? Which I'm sure they did most days. So there's a fine line between that. But we started making a difference. We started kicking some goals. We started achieving things. And then as a team.
Did your confidence grow then?
Yes, it did, but it never leaves you. So I became more confident, certainly externally. And, I certainly have enough bluff within myself to be able to hold that perspective externally. But I would come home every night and go, how did I make it through the day? Because I just didn't have the depth of experience to give me confidence that I really knew what I was doing.
Did you want to quit?
No, I figured they'd fire me before I quit. I figured that would happen
was
first
the money was too good?
Well, for me, yes, I'd never had that kind of money, which was great. But, for me, it was all about, well, this is going to be a learning. If nothing else, I'm going to learn a lot, and it may not end in glory, but I will certainly be better, stronger, and more knowledgeable as a result of it. Then you look back after 6 months and you go, they haven't worked it out. They don't know yet. So you kind of last another 6 months and you get a few more goals, and then all of a sudden they said to me, can you go to London and bring this energy or whatever it is that you do, can you bring that to London? And that was very scary. An Australian kind of going to London for working for British Airways, that's home base. They weren't that excited about having an Australian.
But you kept getting put in these positions of really awkwardness. Between being the young one in a 45-year-old crowd and then being the outsider in London.
Absolutely. And it was very much, tally-ho, we're British Airways. What could an Australian possibly teach us?
What did you teach them?
I taught them how to look at things differently. I taught them that anything is possible. Anything is figure-outable. We can resolve anything. We just have to be smart about it. And we started to do things very differently. And I was actually very fortunate because I had a very young team. And they just came for the ride,
And you were in your late 20s at that point?
Yeah, late 20s. And, and I just said to them, look, we're going to do this together. These are my expectations of you. This is what I expect from you. And in reverse, this is what you can expect from me. So we're really clear on that framework. And if any of us step out of that, then we can bring each other to task. So now let's do this together. So we created an amazing team and we had incredible success in London. And I loved every minute, but still it's kind of that part of me that just goes, yeah, but you're really just bluffing. So it doesn't leave you.
And you ended up quitting that job?
No, I was very fortunate actually because so I was living in London at the time. So and
you were married at this time by this point.
Yes, I was. Well, I'd been married for 7 years, and Robbie, my husband, is a geologist, and so he was constantly on the move. So we literally cross commuted for 4 years. So he'd fly to London, I'd fly back to Sydney, or we would meet in the middle. And then very unexpectedly, I found out that I was expecting Jakey, which was a shock and not part of the plan when you kind of have everything focused on your career. And so I wanted Jakey to be born back in Australia. I wanted him to live a life in Australia. And so very fortunately for me at the time, British Airways decided to buy a 25% stake in Qantas. So convenient when I needed to go home.
Very convenient.
Perfect timing. So I flew back to Australia about 3 weeks before Jakey was born. We kind of pushed it right to the limit. But I was managing cabin crew at the time. And so, so the crew were literally there with the plastic gloves. And
I was going to say, I don't even think they let you fly in your third trimester now.
No, they don't. But, I was the one person that signed off on that anyway. So I signed myself off. The crew had the plastic gloves ready to go. But I got home, had Jakey, took 6 months off, and then was fortunate enough to then start working on what we call the Joint Services Agreement between British Airways and Qantas. So my job was to bring those two airlines together based in Australia. How convenient.
I know. That is brilliant.
Perfect.
And so how long did you stay on with Qantas then?
Well, I was with British Airways and I was seconded to Qantas. And so I did that job for 2 years and then had Connor, my second son.
And you said they're 18 months apart. Is that right? You said earlier to me.
Yep. And after having Connor, then British Airways wanted me to come back to London to work permanently there. But I had 2 small boys. My family was in Australia. I wanted them to grow up in the sunshine. So again, I was just really fortunate. So British Airways then I was then seconded back to Qantas permanently. So because, we were still aligned as an airline. So then I started working. So I left British Airways, started with Qantas full time, and then worked there for 6 years.
Yeah, quite a long time.
Yeah.
And did that blow up on you? Did you get found out after however many years?
Well, they never found out. They kept giving me big promotions, which is always kind of scary because you kind of figure, well, this is the one that's going to blow me out of the water.
What do they call it? I think it's called the Peter Principle. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, where you get promoted until you're incompetent. Yeah. You get promoted to the point of your incompetency, and then it all falls apart from there.
Well, I must admit, I did kind of think that was going to happen at some point, but it never did. But the challenge for me was I then had 2 small sons. I was on an aircraft day in, day out. I was running Australia sales for Qantas. So even though I wasn't traveling a lot globally, I was traveling interstate 3 or 4 times a week. And that's a big deal because that's usually you're up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get a 6 o'clock flight. You're not home till 8 or 9 at night, day after day after day. And they then wanted me to do a global job where I would literally be away 4 weeks out of 6. And it wasn't Qantas's fault, but I think I was starting to get to that point in my life where, and I never thought this would happen, where my values became more important than the next promotion. And, for someone that had been on such a strong career trajectory, I could never have seen that coming.
Well, did you think when you had a strong ambition, did you think that your values were intact, or did you feel like that you were putting those aside to be ambitious and have a career? Was it a cognitive thought?
No, you know what, it wasn't. For me, it was about when I started to get on a roll, and even though I kind of figured that the next one would be the one that would push me over the edge, I became so focused on my career to the point where, again, my poor understanding husband, I can remember coming home going, wow, guess what? They've just transferred me to London. And he went, what do you think I'll be doing? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about that. He's a very good man. We've been married 32 years. He's a good man.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit to some of that as well, that I talk out loud and I think of things before I give other people consideration. Yeah. So I'm at fault for that.
Know that
myself.
Feeling well. But, so I'd been so focused on my career. And even after I had the boys, the environment that I worked with was very masculine. I was one of the most senior women. And at that stage, and again, we were talking many years ago, but at that stage, most women, weren't kind of trying to juggle breastfeeding children and being at work. And
it wasn't acceptable.
no, it wasn't. And I hid that part of me very strongly, like no photos of the boys, because it was a very masculine environment. And I didn't want to feel compromised. I didn't want to feel that, but, by my motherhood, I was potentially giving, someone in a tough political environment, political clout over me. So I hid that part of me. And I think that's when you can only hold that. You can only, what is it they say, that, an emotion buried is buried alive. And you can only kind of hold that down for so long before it starts to bubble up. And to be honest, I had no real concept of values at that point. And then slowly I started to question things. Well, this doesn't feel right. And they were words I'd never used, because it mightn't feel right, but go out and do it anyway. That's just do what you've got to do. And it didn't feel right. And I felt uncomfortable putting my motherhood aside. I felt that I was actually a better leader because I was a mother, not in spite of the fact that I was a mother.
How long do you think those feelings went on for?
A couple of years.
Okay.
And I remember, knowing within myself that I wasn't happy, but not actually wanting to ask myself the specific question, because I knew the answer would be, no, I'm not happy. And then I'd have to do something about it. And I didn't want to do anything about it because I didn't want to change.
You liked your lifestyle.
Life was great. I was the major breadwinner. I was earning a good salary. I had the private school, educate, all the things for my kids. Everything was planned out. We could do amazing things with this salary. And then one day I woke up and I went, and it was a particular incident with, it's always one, but I had a very demanding boss who asked something of me that I just refused to do. I mean, it's not something simple, but he just basically said to me, you need to cut 15% of your team. And I was saying to him, I'm not prepared to cut 15% of my team. In fact, we need to invest in my team. My team need training. They are amazing people, and I can take them to another place, but we have to invest in them. And he said, well, we're not investing in people. End of conversation. If you can't do it, I'll find someone else that can. And I went home that night and I went, that's it. I don't want to be in an environment where I can't do the best thing for my people. And this is not working for me. And I quit.
Did you quit the next day, or did that take some time?
I quit probably about a week later, and then it got very ugly. We were just in a difficult. I was still contracted. They didn't want me to leave my contract. They started to make it very difficult. It became very protracted, but in the end, I was actually able to leave. But yeah, it was a tough few weeks.
I find it really interesting that, and I had a woman on the podcast. Her name is Nicole Antoinette. Just referring back for listeners if they want to go back and listen to that, or if they've heard it, where she said when she makes a decision, and then she just moves forward. And I think that, not doubting her at all, but I find for myself and kind of what I'm hearing from you is that there's a longer period of time where we start to maybe become aware of our feelings, and we start to feel something, and we realize that maybe there's a misalignment, and that it bubbles and it bubbles and it bubbles. And then, unlike you, when you make the decision and you cut the ties and you move forward. But for me, there's a long period of time where I think, I don't know, there's a little thing going on in my gut that thinks, well, maybe this just isn't quite right. Maybe this isn't the right decision, but I'm going to go with it, see kind of where it goes for a while. But then something happens and it's like, boom, okay, I'm done.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like that's what happened to you, that it had been bubbling there for a while, that you had been exploring it, maybe thinking about it in the back of your mind. And then there was a tipping point and you just said, that is the line in the sand. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think things need to incubate. I mean, if I have to, if I'm faced with a yes or no decision, I can make that decision on the spot. The best decisions that I make, though, are when I start paying attention to my intuition. And back then, I really didn't trust my intuition. It's been something, and I think working on your gut is something that takes some time, because you need to be able to say, actually, you know what, that was the right call. And, so I think things really, they come to fruition when you incubate. Because I think you have to go through the pros and cons. You have to do is this right? Is it not right? Is it right? Is it right? But then it's generally a point where you can go no further, when you absolutely have to make that call. But you've spent that time, doing the pros and cons, so that when that crunch time comes, the decision you make is absolutely the right one.
It sounds like I'm trying to draw a correlation here between the time that you had the early job when you were 25, 26 and into your late 20s, where you had that feeling. You probably had a gut sense of today's the day I'm going to get fired, or I made it through another day. Oh my gosh. Now that was a gut instinct. I would call that a gut instinct that you had, yet you were wrong about it and you kept getting promoted and you kept succeeding. But it seems to me that maybe in the wrong environments, our gut is not telling us the right thing.
I don't know whether it was gut, though. I think there's a fine line between gut and fear. And that's, I think, where you have to be able, where it takes a little bit of experience and trust to be able to tell the difference. Thinking that I was going to get fired was just pure fear.
I see. It's
just completely out of control fear and not being able to contain it.
That's a great distinction.
You know, and if I knew then what I knew now. So if when I experienced that, and, you know, sometimes it's just even if I've got a really big ride to do and I know it's going to be hard and it's going to be in snow or whatever, you know, and there's a fear. So when I get that fear now, I manage that very differently. So when I get that fear now, I'm able to recognize that I see, okay, that's fear.
And it's different than a gut feeling of not going down that road because that looks dangerous.
Yep. And there's a difference between, I think, you know, sometimes, so to me, the way I'm able to distinguish the difference is fear is in my head, my gut is in my stomach. And if I can kind of separate the two in my body, then I can work out the difference. So fear stops me or fear curtails me from kind of stepping forward. And I need to be able to step through that fear to get to the other side. I need to recognize it, to see it, to identify it, and then have the courage to continue to work forward. As long as I'm not going to, you know, do something radically dangerous. My intuition is just kind of listening to myself and going, okay, and that's a feeling. So it's about sitting in with my stomach and sitting with my heart and going, okay, so what feels right? What feels good? What feels like I should do? And when I come back to feeling as opposed to head and fear, it tells me a very different story.
Mm-hmm. So your gut was telling you for a couple of years this wasn't right. You hit that tipping point. You quit. And did you have a plan beyond leaving that job?
No, and that started the habit of a lifetime, actually. So no, I didn't. I mean, I knew that, you know, my Jakey was just about to start school, and I knew that I wanted to be able to spend more time with him. And so I kind of figured I had reached the point where I just could not stay in that environment any longer. For me, it was incredibly toxic and it was so opposed to my values. And again, it wasn't my company's fault. It was just kind of, I think, particularly how I, you know, kind of moved forward in my life. Different things were more important to me. And so literally the plan was, right, I'll just get him started at school, I'll breathe and potentially maybe do some consulting. So that was the plan, but there was nothing kind of fixed about it. My next door neighbor was also my closest friend at worked for the same airline. And as the universe kind of brought us together, he was in exactly the same position. He had a very small family, was traveling all the time, it wasn't a good cultural fit for him in that business either. And a couple of weeks after I left, he did too. And so, but his background is investment banking. So, but he was going to start an investment banking consultancy. I thought I'd do marketing.
Is this Grant?
This is Grant.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but at the time, both of our houses were very close, and our kitchen windows were. You could literally knock on one kitchen window and pass things through. So he'd be working on his business plan. I'd be working on my business plan. We'd bang on each other's kitchen windows, pass our business plans through, so that we could, you know, edit each other's and pass them back. And one day, you know, kind of by the back fence, our kids were, you know, grew up together. We were just kind of talking over the back fence, maybe having a glass of wine, and we both said the same thing, we should do something together. And Travel Edge was born on that day.
And what does Travel Edge do?
Travel Edge started as a corporate travel organization. So, you know, our clients are people, you know, like blue chip companies and we do all of their corporate travel. So every time they travel for business, we do the corporate travel. So Grant and I started, the two of us, you know, we're great kind of, you know, leaders and senior management, couldn't write a ticket to save our lives. So, but we figured we could get into less trouble. We just wanted to start a business. You know, we went into corporate travel because we figured that that's what we knew, but we wanted to start a business where our values could be recognized, where we could create an incredible culture, where we could invest in our people, we could watch people grow, and we could do some great stuff for clients.
Did you know that there was did you know or think that there was a missing service for corporate travel and that you could fill that niche?
Yeah, we did eventually. I mean, we sat looking at each other for about 6 months. They were the kind of the parameters that, you know, that we knew that that's what the business had to be. But then, you know, in terms of what it would technically do, we hadn't worked that out. And then we started playing around, and at the time we realized that there were big, high-end global corporate travel companies, people like American Express, Carlson's, etc., that did amazing technology for clients, but their service wasn't that personalized. At the bottom of that, you had, smaller companies that did great personalized service, but they didn't then have the high-end technology.
And they probably couldn't scale for
and
that
they
reason.
couldn't scale, exactly. So, so we came very specifically into the marketplace to pitch Travel Edge right in the middle, that we did incredibly personalized service. And we also had, we invested in high-end technology for our clients. So at the time, we had the whole market to ourselves. Unfortunately, the big ones came down and the small ones came up over a period of time, as as happens.
And as technology developed and
exactly, and it became more affordable.
Right.
And so, but that's very much where we pitched the business. So we started Travel Edge in corporate, and we always had a philosophy that we wanted to use that literally as a scale point for us. So travel would always be kind of the forefront of any of our other businesses, but we decided to just take risks and explore into new fields, and eventually we've ended up with 5 different companies in the group.
And the company is still running today, is that
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely.
Under Travel Edge.
Yeah, it's called the Travel Edge Group, and there are now 5 separate companies within the group.
Mm-hmm. And they all have their own specific business plan or business model?
Yeah, they do. So they're 5 very separate businesses. So, so there's corporate travel, there's events, there's a marketing, there's a loyalty program. So, so they're 5 very separate companies, but all under the Travel Edge Group umbrella now.
And this is the company that we talked about earlier, where you have a CEO who's in place, who's running the day-to-day operations, and you get to drop in on occasion when you're not riding, your Voodoo or your Ducati. Yeah. Or skiing or doing all those other great things. So, wow, quite a trajectory for you. And it's been quite a successful business for you as well. Is that right? Financially successful. I'll just put it right out there.
Yeah, incredibly successful. I mean, we're now the largest, corporate travel management, independent corporate travel management business or, travel group in Australia.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, the last 3 years have been literally I've walked away from it, and, great CEO and Grant. We now have a team of 100, I think they're talking about 170 people now in the business. So,
what do your parents think?
I think they're still surprised.
Do they know, or do they realize what you've done?
Yeah, they do, and I think it's interesting. My dad is English. Always wanted to be a pilot. Grew up in the war. Tough background. And when I worked for airlines, he was incredibly proud, especially British Airways, because that's his home carrier. And when I left, and he drew a lot of pride from that. And when I left the airlines, I think he was devastated. And it's interesting because I found it actually very hard to leave a big brand name company and start your own brand, because, certainly in those days, all my values were aligned to my business card.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, you work for British Airways or Qantas, and that card opens doors, and you work for Travel Edge.
Yeah, now you're an entrepreneur.
It's like, what, Travel Eggs? What's Travel Eggs? No, Travel Edge. So my dad found it very hard. He's now incredibly proud, but, that transition, he lost some of his status, to a degree with that as well. And I think my mum is just surprised. I mean, pleasantly surprised. But, and she will often say, I could never foresee that. I could never see what you could achieve.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what does he do?
He is breathtakingly amazing, completely different to me. He couldn't work out what he wanted to do in this world, travelled. And when he was 25, decided that he wanted to go back to school and become a physiotherapist. He's now one of Australia's leading sports physiotherapists. He actually lives in London now. He's the sports physiotherapist for professional football teams in London.
Soccer for us
soccer.
Americans, yeah.
Soccer and rugby. So he's incredibly successful.
Oh, yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, it sounds like your parents have a lot to be proud of. So that's a great, happy story for them for sure. Gosh, okay. So setting the stage and kind of the big picture here is that I don't think we've talked about how you made the decision to walk away from Travel Edge. Yeah. Was it when you moved to Canada? No, it must have been much more recent than that.
It was. So we came to Canada and, I think as I mentioned, I ran the business, the operation remotely from Canada, which was, I did it for 2 years and was, and it was just about at the end of my tether. It was really difficult trying to do that. We came back for a couple of years. And I was just desperately unhappy. There was a growing knowingness inside me that I had achieved technically everything that was measured as success. And I mean, I wanted for nothing. I had financial stability that I had never envisaged in my life.
How many years had Travel Edge been going?
15 years by that stage. There was you know, we were fortunate enough to be able to afford to live in Canada and do all of those things. And still I used to wake up every morning and going, but I feel empty. And, you know, I coupled that with an incredible need for perfection. Growing up, I'd had quite a few kind of bouts with anorexia. One became very, very serious. I got down to about 35 kilos. And I think in pounds, that's, I don't know. It's not a lot of pounds.
85, 90 pounds?
Yeah, less, probably 70, 75 pounds. And that need for perfection had never left me. So I needed to be perfect in everything that I did. So I had to have, you know, I needed to be, you know, the perfect entrepreneur, the perfect business person, the perfect mother. You know, and I think most working mothers will attest to, you know, how that's an impossibility. But, you know, I still set those impossible standards. I was making homemade cakes at midnight and sewing shirts on my boys' shirts as buttons on my shirts as they were running out the door. And I had to be the perfect athlete. I wasn't content with 10-kilometer runs. I had to be running marathons and triathlons and, you know, doing big adventure events. I needed adrenaline. I was racing motorbikes but I had this incredible, insatiable need to be perfect. You know, I had to have the look. Kind of, I describe it in the book as, you know, think, you know, housewives, real housewives, but without the boobs. You know, the big shoes, the big everything, you know, and that eventually it's impossible to sustain. So, you know, trying to run the business, having this need for perfection, running myself into the ground, you know, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, although I didn't kind of realize that at the time. And I just started getting sicker and sicker and sicker.
And this isn't just during your Travel Edge time living in Canada, but this is a lifelong
This is a lifetime. And I think, you know, we do kind of joke about it, but, you know, it's a kind of family folklore story. And, you know, my dad gets upset when I tell it, but it was, you know, when I was born, I remember them saying, you know, it was in the days where, you know, I don't remember it, but, you know, we tell the story, obviously, that in the days when fathers didn't participate in births, they literally came out and said, congratulations. And the nurse came out and my dad was with my godfather and they said, congratulations, Mr. Hollis, you have a baby girl. And he went, a girl? Oh, desperate to have, you know, his son, an heir.
So are you saying that your need for perfection came from wanting to please your dad because he was disappointed at having a girl?
Not so much the perfection, but kind of, I know that I stepped into kind of a very masculine warrior kind of role. So for me, it was about, you know, not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to, you know, kind of facing everything with a kind of a shield up and a sword sharpened, ready to fire, needing to be perfect, never wanting to ask for help, you know, just pushing myself, you know, to be that masculine person. And so, you know, so when you've had years and years and years of practice doing that, you can hold it together for so long and then eventually, you know, bits of your armor start falling off. And I was leaving pieces all over the floor.
In what way?
I think, you know, most of it, it started at work. We'd gone through a number of transitions at Travel Edge and, you know, we were at a point where we needed to go to the next transition. And I suddenly, you know, realized I didn't have the energy. You know, I didn't want to do it. I was bored. And that's the first time in my life I've ever felt that. And I knew I wasn't doing a good job. You know, I knew I wasn't doing the business any favors because I just didn't have the energy to lift myself and take the business to the next level.
How old were you then?
53, 54. It had just gone. I just wasn't enjoying it. I started to get sick. I got pneumonia and I never get sick. I got pneumonia. Then it kind of spiraled out of control in terms of a bunch of other illnesses. And I remember going to the doctor and the doctor said to me, you know, you're stressed and you're out of control and I need to give you something for that.
Was this in Canada or?
No, this was in Australia. And I remember looking at him going, you don't know who I am. I'm a warrior woman. I don't take medication. I don't need anything to calm me down. And I literally stormed out of his office and sat in my car for 15 minutes and then went, he's right, I'm losing it. And I think, you know, things eventually then just kind of came to a head. And then literally one morning I got up to go run and I went into the bathroom and I just had, and I don't know why epiphanies always happen in bathrooms. Maybe it's because the lighting's really bad. But I looked at myself and I went, who are you? Who are you? What are you trying to do?
Well, it's got the biggest mirror in the house, right?
And those bloodshot eyes are just magnified, you know, in that kind of light. And I thought, I don't know who you are. I don't know the life that you're living. This is not what's making you happy. And you just have to stop this. And you have to stop this right now because you are just spiraling out of control. And something has to change and it has to be right now.
So just like that.
It was literally just like that. I remember kind of sinking to the bathroom floor, just crying. And as I was crying, I'm going, well, I don't know what to do. What do I do? I'm the one that drives the financial security of our family. I've got a business that's responsible for me, to me, that I'm responsible for. I've got, family, and they need to go to private school, and I don't know what to do. And I heard two distinct words in my head: just quit. And I remember sitting on the floor going, well, just quit what? Quit living, quit my job, quit my fam. What do I do? And it just came back, just quit. And I had a shower, put myself together, and I came out and I said to Robbie, I have to go in and I've got to talk to Grant. I need to leave the business. And I'd not had a single conversation with Robbie. So you can imagine when that comes out, it's like, looked at his watch right now. And I said, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to have the courage to do it later. So poor old Grant was in Italy on holidays. And I remember this kind of crazy wild woman calling him saying, I have to go, I have to quit, I have to leave. And I don't know why.
Totally left field for him too.
Absolutely. It was left field for me as well. And he was very understanding under the circumstances, came back, and I had no idea what I was going to do, but I just knew I had to leave. And it's hard enough to leave a job, let alone your own company. But we were very fortunate. We found a really good CEO. She's done an amazing job, and put her in. And I spent 6 months working with her, as we transitioned. Still had no idea what I was going to do to kind of find myself. And in the middle of the night, and I was asking this voice that had told me just quit. It's like, okay, and now what? Where are you now? And in the middle of the night, one night I just woke up and again, 2 words, go ride. And I went, that's it. That's what I do. I ride. So that's what I did.
And were you in Canada at the time?
No, I was in Australia. So I woke Robbie up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I went, I'm going riding. And he went, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. What is the matter with you? So I just said, I've got to go. I called a friend in Vancouver. I knew that, and Jakey was in Whistler by that stage. I knew that I wanted to start in Whistler. So I called a friend. He went looking. He found my bike. He and I did an over-the-phone negotiation with the bike dealer. Bought the bike, waited, and, a few weeks later, here I was.
And had you mapped out your path at that point? Did you know what you wanted to do? So you arrived in Whistler, and then what did you do?
Well, when I first had to get the family over the hurdle that I was going, and as you can imagine, it's, solo traveler. I mean, you know what it's like. You've done it. Solo traveler, you're dangerous. You're on the roads.
You're a woman.
You're a woman. It's not safe. Did we mention it's not safe? And eventually.
According to who?
According to them. According to the people that want to protect you.
Yeah. I want to just clarify that for listeners, because you're saying that kind of cheekily. That it's not safe, because it is safe.
Absolutely.
But the perception for a lot of people is that it's not. Just as the perception of a lot of things, it's not safe or it's not doable, but it really is.
And I think, it's not safe because in their frame of reference, it's out of the ordinary. But I never once doubted for a minute that I would not be safe. Never once. I had, and it's, I knew I was a capable rider. I am navigationally challenged, but the worst that could happen was I would have to go back and retrace my routes. I've ridden all of my life. I've ridden since I was 16. So, a bike and me, that's my home. It's my happy place. And I knew that the experiences that I get would be the ones that I was meant to get. So, kind of using that as a frame of reference. I mean, I never, people used to say, and I'm sure they did to you too, weren't you frightened? Never was I frightened. I bought a whole bunch of maps before I left, but every time I put the maps out, I went, well, this is very daunting. And I would fold them all carefully up, and I just thought, I'll wait till I get there. And I literally, I made up the journey as I went along.
Did you use an app like a Google Map kind of thing? Or did you literally have a paper map and a tank bag?
Yep.
Do you have one of the tank bags with the clear plastic over the top?
No, unfortunately on a super bike, they don't actually build tank bags.
Oh, okay.
Because they don't expect you to tour on them. So, but I did, right. I did live on maps, and, and I wanted to feel hands-on. So, and I still have my maps, and they've got holes in them where they've been folded 57 times. And the hole is usually where I'm supposed to be. So, kind of getting to that spot was a bit of, imagination. But I love my maps, and I loved, I used to pull them out every night. And I really couldn't have planned too much in advance because, weather conditions and fires apart from anything else. The year that I did, there were a lot of fires in California, in Oregon, in Washington. So often I would plan a route the night before, and I get up in the morning and I'd check, and the fires would have closed that road. So, so my route was very determined by weather. I used to find the squiggliest road that I could never travel on highways because the squiggly road means there's lots of turns and it's
that's
bends
beautiful.
and you get to kind of lean this big machine in and out of corners. So, I had a couple of great books. They're called Destination Highway, and they're for motorcyclists, and they tell you the best motorcycle roads. So I kind of literally planned it by best motorcycle roads and fires. And that was the way that I kind of worked my way through it.
You have a big bike.
I do.
You have it's an 1100, and my bike is a 650. And I rode my motorcycle from Seattle to Panama, which I think you know about, which you were alluding to, that, people think it's so dangerous, but you end up having a great, you have a good attitude and you have a great experience.
Yep.
And I did have some fear during that, foreign culture, not speaking the language, that kind of thing. But for the most part, not a lot of fear behind it. You have a big bike and you're a tiny woman. Are you 5'3"?
Yeah, I'm 5'3".
Okay, because
exactly.
I'm 5'2", 5'2.5",
Yeah.
something like that. And you're very petite. And yet you're on that bike, and you showed me the bottoms of your boots where just the tippy toes, are worn off because you can't even stand flat-footed on your bike.
No.
Now, my bike, I have a lowering kit on it, and then I wear boots with a little bit of a heel. So I think I'm just about flat-footed on mine, so that's good. But when I look at your bike, and I think, one, it's not very comfortable, because you said it's not made for touring. It's a race bike. So here you are on that bike for hours and hours a day. And I'm going to ask you the question, and I think, I don't know, it would be my fear, but what was your biggest fear on the trip?
My biggest fear was actually when Voodoo is moving, she and I are, we're stuck together like glue. My biggest fear was two fears. One was just actually maneuvering her around. She's very difficult to park and maneuver, because as you said, I'm on my toes and she's heavy. She's nearly she's 210 kilos. So, it's about, 400 plus pounds?
500. Yeah, because it's 2.2, right?
So she's a heavy bike to maneuver around. And that's my biggest fear. If I'm on a flat surface, and it's concrete, I'm fine. But the minute it hits gravel, my feet start to slide. So I was actually terrified of dropping her as I parked her. And just maneuvering her around. So that was, number one was my biggest fear. And number two, cold. I really don't do
just
cold.
The cold.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, interesting.
And
do you have heated vest, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I did have a heated vest, but I just found, some of the extremes, because I went for 3 months and towards the end I was getting rain and hail and snow and just being cold. And when you're cold on a bike, the bike kind of takes over. The bike kind of knows. And Voodoo has her own personality, and she knew. So when I was cold, she would just kind of fight me, because you clench up on a bike and you don't flow with a bike, and you're stiff and you're jerky, which means that you don't control it very well, and she doesn't flow.
Oh, and your hands.
And
oh,
your
my
hands.
goodness, your hands are so cold.
And literally every 3 to 5 minutes, there would be about every 20 minutes I would have to stop and pull over and just shake my hands and get the blood back in my hand, because I had no movement. So when you have no movement in your hands, for those of you that have never ridden a bike, it means you can't accelerate properly, but more importantly, you can't brake. You can't feel how hard you're putting the brakes on, and particularly in the rain, that can just send you aquaplaning. So they were my fears, those and hitting wild animals, because it's, moose and caribou and deer and, everything that kind of came out at me in the middle of the road. So,
it's funny and the reason I ask that, because I have a similar fear that I'll share with you in just a minute. But when you talk about a big trip like that, and a motorcycle trip specifically, I think a lot of people from the outside, maybe who aren't riders, would look in and say, my gosh, she must have been so, like, those things that are so unsafe or that are so scary that you should be fearful of are other drivers, for one thing, driving fast, getting into an accident, which are valid fears. But the biggest fear that I had on my motorcycle trip to Panama was parking at a gas station and and maneuvering, making sure that it was was very flat, and that the bike would tip over with me standing there in front of everybody else. And I just thought, if I can just get through this gas station, then everything will be fine. And, didn't matter that there were cows and dogs and horse carts, going through, in El Salvador, who are on this tiny little strip that they call the Pan American quote unquote highway, because it is not a highway. But my biggest fear was coming up to a gas station and the bike dumping over and the gas leaking out and me not being able to pick it up.
Well, and I can just so attest to that, because, again, you have no concept of how challenging a gas station can be until you've been on a big bike.
Yeah.
You know, because the driveways, they kind of flick up, there's gravel, there's oil everywhere. The potential for disaster in a gas station is just huge.
You know, you take it for granted when you're in a car.
You do. You do.
That is too funny.
No.
Yeah, so I can
relate to that.
I know. That is just great. Oh my gosh. So big trip. You were gone for, was it about 13,000 miles?
Yeah, well, about 12,000 miles. Yeah, we were gone for 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I love that you just use we, I know. Because I think, who was with you? Oh yeah, Voodoo.
Yeah, Voodoo.
So, and then just about 3 months that you were gone.
Yeah.
And what was it like coming home?
It was really tough. It was tough because I'd spent 3 months just learning so much about myself and getting a better understanding of the things that I thought were really important in life. Having been taught lesson after lesson, almost lesson overload, you know, and then kind of coming back and feeling that the trip had been nothing really. I mean, it's just 3 months on a motorbike. It's not a big deal. But at the same time, it had been everything. And trying to kind of balance the emotion between those was really difficult, you know, because, you know, in the scheme of things, it wasn't curing cancer. You know, people used to say, oh, you're so inspirational. It's like, well, I'm not really. I'm just sitting on my bottom all day riding a motorbike. It's not a big deal. But then kind of trying to balance the fact that it wasn't to me necessarily a big deal, but in my reality, it had changed everything.
What did it change? What did you walk away with?
It changed so much about me. It changed literally who I was. Just incredible lessons along the way. I mean, I had been, you know, in this kind of warrior mode. It was very much about me, you know, about me, what I needed to achieve, what I needed to, you know, to do, what I wanted to be. And probably one of the most important lessons that I learned on this trip, and you know, you just get that being on a bike, was the power of connectivity.
To the weather, to the roads.
And to people. You know, I kind of look back at my old life, and it's something that I have to remind myself every single day, that when you put the energy out there to connect with people, the energy that you get back is usually 10 times what you put out. And in my old day, you know, you'd be rushing from appointment to picking up the kids to doing everything, and your head would be down. And I wouldn't consciously connect with anyone, you know, kind of outside my sphere. When you're on a bike and you're on your own and you're spending so much time just in your helmet, the connections that you make with people were the things that gave me real joy. And they were just breathtaking. But I learned it was a conscious decision. If I decided to get on my bike in the morning and not connect with anyone, just put my head down, buy a coffee, buy gas, move on, then my day was absolutely empty. So I used to start the morning every morning with a conscious connection. And it was, you know, and literally I would set the intent. I want to kind of shine brightly to everyone that I meet today, whether it's the barista that serves me a coffee, whether it's the guy at the petrol station, whether it's the scary Harley rider that's standing alongside me that normally I would avoid like the plague and put my head down because they terrify me. You know, and the minute I would put that energy out, the energy that I got back was just breathtaking.
When I lived in Sydney, this is a brilliant parallel to that. When I lived in Sydney, I lived in Redfern.
Yeah, that's an interesting place.
Yeah, it is. And for anyone who doesn't know, I know there's a television series on now called Redfern Now, and it's quite different than Redfern then. When I was there in 1992, it could really be equated with kind of the Harlem, what
Absolutely.
people might think of the old Harlem. I know Harlem's changed as well, but the Harlem of Australia, not a safe place necessarily, and it's very much an Aboriginal community.
Yep.
Hopefully it still is. I don't know. I think it's more gentrified now. But I was one of very few white people who lived there. And I was there for a couple of months. And I remember I would walk down the street and I would walk by people who were sitting out just on their porch. And I would say, "How you going?" And they would say, "Yeah, how you going? Like, how you doing today?" And I just remembered that what I put out there was what I got back.
Absolutely.
And I did not walk down the street with fear because these were my neighbors and they were lovely people. And I know that, like, as crazy as this sounds to the vast majority of people, they were renters. And I remember them, they would have fires, you know, fire pits going, just like they would in the bush. They'd have fire pits going. And they would tear apart the molding. If they ran out of fire, they would tear apart the molding and the baseboard in their house to burn that as part of their fire. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, if I owned the house,
the house owners probably didn't, but
I would be furious. But I just thought, to me, that was so indicative of how ingrained their culture was, that they needed a fire. It's a 50,000-year-old culture that's part of their DNA, and they're going to figure out how they're going to build a fire. And I love that. But I just remember walking down the street, and I just thought, you know what? If I'm putting good energy out there, I'm going to get that good energy back. And that's just like you making those connections. And I think of this often. How do we bring that into our everyday life?
Yeah, look, it's very challenging. And because you kind of come back into day to day, and I used to hate going into cities. Sometimes I'd have to go into a city to get voodoo serviced, and I would hate it because instantly I got back into a city. People had their heads down. You walk into an elevator, everyone's looking at their iPhone, and it's really difficult to make that connection. But the power when you do is incredible. And again, it's something that I have to remind myself every day. And I actually do a really, it's somebody did it to me on the trip, and I love it. And it's something that I try and do most days because it just reminds me to do it. And it's called Give Coffee Forward. I don't know if you've heard of it, but literally I was standing in a queue in Jackson, Wyoming, and this man was just chatting to me in a Starbucks. And, and as we're chatting, as we come up to the counter, he said to me, I'd like to do this thing. It's called Buy Coffee Forward. And your obligation is you have to take that energy and do it to someone else tomorrow. And I just loved that.
Was he in front of you or behind you?
He was in front of me.
Okay.
So we were talking, and then just as he got to the counter, he just said, and what coffee would you have? And he explained it, and I was a bit kind of taken aback. But I loved it, and so I would do that every single day, and I try and do that even in the city because it just, although there's a little bit more suspicion, it's just...
It seems to me there would be less suspicion in a city, though. Because I would imagine if you were in a small town where everyone knew each other and you did this.
Oh, it's funny though. I think also you have to pick your audience because the first time I tried to do it, there was someone in, so I kind of turned to this gentleman and it was a big grand gesture. Well, I heard about this thing, I'd like to buy your coffee, in a very heavy European accent. He said to me, I don't need your charity. I can buy my own. So, okay, strike one.
Dude, you don't get it. Oh, geez.
But the next day I was in a place called Cody, Wyoming, and and you've got to see this place to believe it. I mean, it is the ultimate Wild West. It's, Wild Bill Hickok, And there was a beautiful gentleman standing behind me, an elderly gentleman. And he was a bit kind of taken back when I explained it, but, very graciously accepted my offer. And we sat outside in the sun. We talked for over an hour. And it was one of the most poignant parts of my trip. He was just this beautiful man, and he just said to me, look, I'm 87, but don't tell anyone in the town. They think I'm 82. He said, I'd hate them to know how old I am. And he told me his story. He'd had a stroke. The left-hand side of his body didn't work. He'd been married to his beautiful bride for 60 years. He was hoping to get another 10 years with her. She eventually came down and to collect him, and she pinched his cheek and she said, at 87, you're still flirting with women. And as he left, he turned around and he said to me, life's about celebrating what we have, whatever that is, and loving. And, I would have missed that connection. That was one of the most beautiful experiences and beautiful connections. And I would have missed it if I just sat in that coffee queue, bought myself a coffee,
yourself.
Sat outside in the sun by myself.
I really love that idea. I've thought about in the past, we have a lot of homeless here, unfortunately, in Seattle, and we've got more and more in West Seattle too. And often what I will do is I will buy a coffee for someone who's standing outside. If they're near a coffee shop and I'm going in, I will get something. But I've thought about being in line, saying something to the person behind me. And you do have to watch your audience because I hope this guy's not thinking I'm flirting with him or, there's something going on.
Yeah.
But I also have this fear that I'm going to say, and I'm doing this thing, pay it, your coffee forward or whatever. And he's the one who's getting 8 coffees for his office. That's what I think. I'm like, I know this is going to be the one where the guy's getting, buying the entire office. And he came in for 6 scones and whatever. But I have to get over that.
Yeah, you do. And it's funny when you kind of talk about the homeless because there was a homeless gentleman outside of Starbucks when I was in Colorado. And so I went inside and, I just said, look, and he looked really hungry. So I just said, look, please don't tell him it's from me, but, can you just take a coffee and a, Egg McMuffin or something out to him? Can you buy him a coffee? And she said, oh, he actually prefers a gift card.
That's funny. I was just up at, and this isn't like altruistic hour, but hopefully maybe it'll inspire somebody else. We have a Trader Joe's about 3 blocks from here. And there was a family, there was a mother and 2 kids out, a Hispanic family. And she had a sign, anything, please. And I just went over and I said, what can I get you some food? Can I get you something? What would you like? And she said, like a baked chicken or something. And they don't have that in Trader Joe's, like a hot baked chicken. And I said, well, they don't have that, I don't think, but they have sandwiches and soups and, and the boy said, gift card. So I went in and I was putting it on 2 different debit cards, whatever. Yeah. So I got the gift card for them, and the woman said, oh, do you need a thing? And I said, no, I'm getting it for the family outside. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's so nice. And the woman behind me said, you just made my day. That was just the nicest thing. And I just thought, maybe she is going to go pay it forward to somebody else because she just heard that story. Yeah. And so, I don't think you and I tell these stories to get the pats on the back, but it's to plant a seed that the kindnesses don't have to be to your kids or to your significant other. It can be completely anonymous, and you just put it behind you, and then you're on with your day. And I think that's really it does my soul good.
Well, and that's actually, you don't do it for yourself, but the bottom line is you get so much more out of it. When I've had conversations where I've gone in with a barista and they've just been cranky, and I thought, I'm going to crack you. And somewhere between ordering an Americano and then, and paying for it, all of a sudden I've heard this guy's life story, and the joy that you get from that connection, particularly when you're on the road and you're by yourself, that you just hold that in your heart all day. It's just precious beyond words.
It's funny when we go, John and I walk a lot. And so when we go on a walk, and it's a joke to me, and it's not, it's a little bit of our inside joke, but we walk by, and if somebody's working in their yard, no matter how it looks, he goes, looks great. And then they're like, oh, yeah, look at this. I'm doing a great job. And, and then they get with it a little bit more. But if you just give somebody a little compliment, then
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, you noticed me. Yeah, it's kind of neat. So I don't know. Okay, that's a little bit of a tangent. But I think it's an important one. And I love that story. And I'm going to put that into practice, your coffee story. And I also think if you have a story behind it, and you explain it to the person, then it doesn't seem so weird, because I think the way that it would tumble out of my mouth is, hey, let me get your coffee today. And that just seems weird. But if you say, you know what, I just learned this really cool thing where and you do it the next time around.
Exactly.
And then it gets that person thinking too. So
what I do in Australia, though, I've got, my favorite coffee shop there. And sometimes, to overcome the awkwardness, and they're really good. They know me now. So sometimes when I buy my own coffee, I'll just say, can you add 2 onto mine? And the next 2 people that you come in that feel like you need a coffee, please just give them a coffee.
That's brilliant too.
And that works out really well. It took me forever, because what they used to say was someone had come in and they'd say, oh, that lady over there, I say, no, it's anonymous. It's anonymous. Yeah. But it's just the power of just,
and you have no idea. That is neat.
And then to encourage them to do the same thing.
What part of Sydney do you live in?
We're in Mossman, so it's about 10 minutes out of Sydney.
Okay. I'm trying to picture it like favorite, because I lived in Glebe for a little while as well. And Glebe was just such a fun, funky town. That's where I remember 1992, early days of the coffee shops.
Yeah.
But I remember really great coffee shops there. So, okay. Tangent, back on track here. What were we chatting about? So you made this big transition with the Travel Edge. You took your big motorcycle trip. You came back and you were writing and blogging about it. And you had mentioned to me that you were keeping a personal travel journal.
Yeah.
And you were also blogging about it. What was the difference between the two? What were you pouring out in the journal that you weren't publicly blogging about?
Well, the blogging was very much, was the kind of the logistics of the journey. So I went here today, I met this person, we had this great connection, this funny story happened, I nearly dropped my bike today, all of those kind of, the general stuff. Sometimes I censored it a little bit, so if there was a couple of incidences that had happened where I nearly got squished between 2 trucks and things like that. And so to stop people worrying, some things I just didn't quite make it into the blog. But the blog was pretty factual, and it was about, it did have my reflections, but it was mainly about this happened and the story of the day. So every day I would spend a couple of hours and blog. Then by the time my family or my friends woke up in Australia, they used to be able to read it over coffee. So, and it saved me having to tell the same story 57 times. So there was convenience about the blog, but my journal, I became a big journaler on this trip. And so, part of my routine every day is literally I get up, I meditate, I go for a run, get a coffee, and I write. And the journal was really my personal journey. So it was me looking at what had brought me to this point, how had I kind of spiraled so out of control, what was important, what were the lessons that I wanted to learn. And then as I started learning lessons on the journey, I would, sometimes I'd think I'd get hold of a lesson, but, it's kind of like holding custard. You think you've got it in your hand and it slides through your fingers. So, going back on the lessons that I had to learn again and again and again. Vulnerability, for example, was one. I had struggled being vulnerable. In my whole life, I never wanted anyone to do anything. I could only do, no one could do it as well as me. I had to do it myself. And when you're on a trip like this, there are sometimes you have to be vulnerable. Just a really simple example. When you check the tire pressure on a tire in Australia, it's really simple. We've got a very simple gadget. You dial in what you want. You just put it on the bike and it fills automatically. For anyone that's tried to put air in a bike tire in North America, you have no idea. It's an unbelievable process. So the first time I went to put air in the tire of Voodoo, so, I'm kind of looking and I'm going, how does this work? It doesn't fit on. I can't know what to do.
You have to put the money in because they're going to charge you for air.
And that shocked me. Mm-hmm. So I put all my money in, but by the time I'd actually worked out how to actually get this thing onto all my money had run out. So I had to go back. And so I'd been literally lying on my back, on my stomach, on my side for about 20 minutes trying to do this and couldn't work out how to do it. And there was a guy watching me in a truck and he was just kind of smirking to himself and he came over and he said, so little lady, do you need a hand?
Where was this? Do you remember?
It was in Washington somewhere. Yeah. It was very early on in the trip. And I said, no, it's fine. I've got this. Thank you. No, it's my bike. I know how to fill on it, fill the tires. And so he went, not a problem, went back to his truck. And fortunately, it takes a long time to fill a truck. And 10 minutes later, I'm still on the ground. And he walked over and I went, you know what? I can't do this. I have no idea what I'm doing. And he said to me, so where's your tire pressure gauge? And I went, my what? And he went, oh, seriously.
At least you have the accent, though. Yeah. That at least you have the accent. It's like, this isn't how we do it in Australia.
I did try and explain that, but he was like, come with me. So we went in, he bought me, bless him, he bought me a tire pressure gauge. He came, he showed me, which is just as well, because by that stage my tires were completely flat. I'd let all of the air out of my tires. So he helped me. And, as he went away, he said, you keep that tire pressure handy, little lady, okay? And as he left, it kind of dawned on me, I got on my bike and I was, very grateful. But I realized that, kind of in being vulnerable, number one, I didn't have to have all the answers and I allowed myself to be helped. But number two, what I'd never seen was the gift that vulnerability gives. So in me kind of going, yeah, right, I've got no idea. And him helping me, he kind of got back in his truck and he felt good. And I'd never made that correlation that in being vulnerable, in being saying, you know what, I need a hand. Not only do you get help, how good is that? You don't have to figure it all out yourself. But number two, you're actually giving someone a precious gift because they are feeling valued and it's good to be able to help someone else.
And he's got a great story to tell.
About this Australian woman that was lying on her stomach for 20 minutes in the heat, sweating like a little piglet. Yeah. I'm sure that's a good story.
Absolutely insisting that she doesn't need help. Yeah. So it was stories like that you learned. But it took you some time.
It did. And, and sometimes you've just, for me, things like, on a journey like this, I am a ferocious planner. So ideally, as I said, you kind of plan the journey, you get up in the morning and it's step by step. And I had to learn to let go of control. I was completely out of control. The fires or the weather or the roads. There were things that I couldn't control on this journey, but I could control how I responded to them. And, for someone that's usually, in control in everything in my life, being able to just kind of surrender to the unknown, that took a lot of practice as well. Just when I think, I'm good, I'm surrendering to the unknown, whatever happens, whatever comes my way is great, I can handle it, but I'll just control this little bit of it.
Are you a meditator?
I wasn't, but I am now. On this trip, I started.
You started, because I think so much of that goes to learning not to have control, being aware enough of your mind, first being aware enough of your mind and what's going on in your mind, and then also just realizing, kind of coming to that conclusion that things are out of your control. I think
Absolutely.
Those are just lessons that we learn as we get to know ourselves better, that you can't control everything.
I actively avoided meditation like the plague. I would rather have had root canal therapy than to have sit with myself for 5 minutes. When you ask about the things that I was frightened of, I was frightened of meditation because I knew it would probably raise tough questions that I didn't want to answer. So on this trip, on probably day 3, I kind of figured to myself, well, I'm facing a bunch of fears here. I might as well face this one. And I found I was in Jasper, and it's hard not to find a beautiful spot in Jasper. So I found a spot by a lake, was just divinely beautiful. And I sat for 15 minutes. I think I probably only got 2 consecutive breaths in that 15 minutes that I didn't have thoughts bombarding me. But those 2 breaths were just magical. And that really did start my journey with meditation. And it's an integral part of my day now.
But I think part of meditation, though, too, isn't about even quieting the mind. I think it's about becoming aware of what's going on in the mind. So you might have a couple of quiet breaths, which are brilliant, but that doesn't even matter. And I hear people say, and I'm no expert meditator, but I have some experience with it. And I remember, and I didn't have these words for people in the past, but now I've just come to understand it better. But I've had people tell me in the past, there's no way that I could sit down and meditate because my mind is just going so crazy. But it's not about the mind going crazy. It's about watching the mind go crazy.
That's exactly it. And they say if you don't have 2 minutes to meditate, then you need to meditate for 10.
Then you need 40 or 20 of it. Yeah.
And I think that was my fear, because it's like, well, I can't sit still. I'm never going to be able to meditate. I can never get my mind to be calm. But that's the trick. The trick is it's the noticing. And then just going, well, okay, thought, come back to my breath. And I think one of the things that meditation's actually given me is just kind of a better ability. I mean, I always say it's progress, not perfection. But I have a better ability now, some days, not all days, to catch myself at things, to see, oh, okay, you're just about to react really badly here, pull yourself back. And that's really helped me. I still kind of blow up and I still have issues, but I see them, I think, now. Right. Differently.
I find that if I make time for the 2 minutes or the 10 minutes meditation, that gives me 30 minutes, maybe an hour in my day when I didn't blow up or I didn't go down, a rabbit hole because I was going off on some crazy tangent in my own mind about why I'm upset about something.
Exactly.
So it gives me time in that day.
Yeah.
So speaking of quiet and meditation, in your helmet, do you listen to anything or do you just keep, because I know it's so much easier for people these days to have earbuds in or to have something going on in their head, literally going on into their ears with the helmet on. Do you keep it quiet?
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. I mean, well, one thing, if there's a big truck coming, I want to hear it.
Yeah.
And Voodoo's, it's quite a noisy bike anyway. It's a big engine and so there's a lot of power. But no, I really cherish that time in my helmet where there's just me and my thoughts.
It's a beautiful time, isn't it?
It's a precious time. I actually can't, I haven't ridden for a couple of weeks, and just even riding to Seattle from Whistler to here, you put that helmet on and I forget how much I love that. It's a time where I can actually reconnect with myself. It's a time where I can kind of think things through. I can answer questions. You have to be careful in your helmet, though, that you don't loop. Sometimes, it'll be, because there's no one else. And when you're by yourself for hours on end, there's no one to say, oh, you're being an idiot, let it go. So I'm also really conscious in, when I'm in my helmet that I'm not looping. I'm just going, oh, I should have said that. Oh, I was such a dumbo. Why didn't I should have done that differently. And I actually have a process when that looping starts. And it's a process that was taught to me kind of on a beautiful spiritual guide that I have in Vancouver. And it's literally, I feel myself going, stop. I put my hand up to say, stop, disconnect. I feel pulling a cord out of the wall. So disconnect from that thought and let it go. And I watch the thought fly away. And I put something else instead of that thought. So I, put a good thought or a positive thought or a powerful thought. And sometimes you have to do it again and again and again until you stop looping. But to me, that then kind of clears that out of my head. But no, I really cherish that quiet time. It's, it's precious beyond words.
When you go for a run, do you listen to anything?
Occasionally I'll listen to a podcast. But again, generally I don't, because it's, when I run, and I'm very fortunate to be able to run, kind of in nature. But I love the whole kind of sensory overload. I love hearing the birds. I love listening to the water. I love the smells of damp earth. I love feeling the breeze. And I just feel if I'm blocking things out, then I could just as well be running on a treadmill. So no, I'm a big kind of naked technology girl.
Yeah,
all around.
I like to hear that. I just ran a marathon last weekend, and I had music going because when I do a marathon, I've got to have. That's kind of
very different, though.
Yeah, I've got this whole playlist that's all queued up and timed and everything for exactly where I'm going to be, during the marathon. But even when I go out and I run, and especially if it's a long run, if I'm doing 20 or 22 miles or something, I've got to have a bunch of podcasts in. But I've really been thinking more, especially this past week, I'm kind of done with having something in my ears. And I've been more aware of the fact, I find that my podcasts, there's so many brilliant podcasts out there, and mine are getting kind of stacked up, and there's a bunch that I want to listen to. So I'll have my I'll be cleaning around the house, or I'll go up to the post office and I've got it in so I can catch up. And I find myself going into the post office, and I pull it out of my ear when I get up there. And I just thought, I just think I need to not have anything in my ears for a while and just kind of take a break and just have that quiet time for myself, because I think that that's important. I haven't gone for a run. I plan to run later today. It'll be my first time running since the marathon because I've been so sore. But I'm going to go out for a run. And I thought, I'm just going to go out for 2 or 3 miles, and I'm just going to go and not have anything going on and kind of take in that. And it's different. I'm in the city, and it's, although it's not super cityish here in our little neighborhood, there's still plenty of cars, not as many birds as I would like. But anyway, I'm certainly thinking more about that, just that quiet time. And
it's hard though, because I think, particularly with podcasts, you're right, there's some incredible content. But I'm in a similar position, and I start getting stressed because it's like, well, I haven't missed that episode, and there's already another episode. And what if I miss that learning? And what happens if you miss the learning is you'll get it somewhere else.
Well, true. Or you can live without it, And
exactly.
I do, like, John's been listening to these great podcasts, and I'll just say what they are because listeners might enjoy them too. Ben Greenfield does a pretty incredible podcast where he basically experiments on himself with all sorts of technologies and superfoods and all sorts of things. So he has these amazing doctors and scientists that are on. So John keeps telling me, you got to listen to this one. You have to listen to this one. And my friend Marcia sends me, I heard you on your own podcast about talking about this. And I think you would like this podcast, a Krista Tippett episode. And so I've got this kind of stacked up, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, well, I have a long flight to, I'm actually flying to Brisbane and then on to Papua New Guinea.
When you get to New Guinea.
Yeah, shortly. It'll be after this will air and I will have already taken that trip. But I'm thinking, well, maybe on that 14-hour flight,
that's
perfect. I could catch up on that because I'll be stuck in my seat during that time. But anyway, quiet, meditation, peacefulness, that is all good. And we are so, you alluded to it before, you said something before about just people being on their phones and their heads down, and our posture has changed because we're looking down so much. And it's so sad that we don't have those same connections, but when you're out there, and although you didn't make it a part of this, but I do think that when you're on the bike and you are so exposed to the elements, even if you're driving in your car with the windows down, you've got the elements, let it blow through your hair.
Absolutely.
Just completely different.
And it doesn't, but again, you have to notice it, and it's a conscious decision, and it's one of the things that I really love about the bike. I am a bunny when it comes to being cold, and I hate being cold, but it's an integral part of it, so, and I can sit there on the bike and I can go, I hate this, I'm cold, I'm freezing, I've got water coming out of my gloves. Or you can say, okay, so this is now teaching me something. What am I going to learn from it? But the elements to be in a forest and smell fresh pine trees. And even, I can tell the difference. I can tell a 1 or 2 degree difference in temperature on the bike. All of a sudden you just get that. It's imperceivable, but you get just a slight warmth of the sunshine on your shoulder. And you learn to celebrate all of that stuff, particularly when you're cold. I'll take a 1% increase in temperature anytime, but your body feels the whole environment around you. It's an all-encompassing sensory overload when you're on the bike.
Mm-hmm. As you said, you've been riding since you were 16.
Yeah.
Who taught you?
Well, my mother was very clear, there will be no motorbikes in this family.
I grew up in that same family.
She still holds to that. But my brother was working at a place that was a very, very long way away. It was a long distance and there was no public transport. So my mother actually agreed to let him get a motorbike to be able to, but just to commute to and from work. And she was really clear, if you buy a motorbike, the bike can stay, but you have to leave. So, but he used to keep her locked up in a garage. And on Sunday mornings, when I knew that he'd probably had a big night the Saturday night before and was fast asleep, and my mum didn't wake up. So really early in the mornings, I used to creep into the garage, used to steal the bike, and I taught myself to ride on this thing. And then bought my first bike, but, being cognizant of what my mum had said, I kept my bike at my friend's place for about a couple of years down the road without her knowing, or so I thought. And it was literally about a year ago she mentioned something about my first bike, and I said, what are you talking about? She said, do you think I didn't know? So the lesson there for everyone is that mums always know.
How did you ever think to be so bold, to use the podcast here, to be so bold to just go out and...
I fell in love with it. I kind of watched my brother surreptitiously. I learned, and it was a kickstart. So it was one that was wasn't an electric start. So it was a really basic bike. I watched him and watched him and watched him. And I used to wheel it down the drive so that no one would hear me start it. And I got on this thing and I wobbled off down the road every Sunday morning for months until I kind of conquered this thing. But I fell in love with it. Just being in control of something that was just uncontrollable. Just literally day one, I just thought, I have to do this. Just loved it.
I grew up in New Jersey, and my family said the same thing. There will be no motorcycles in this house. You will not have a motorcycle while you live here. Although I think I have 3 older brothers, and I think I remember at least one of them having a bike.
Yeah.
I think my brother Mark did. So what did I do? I moved to Seattle, rainy Seattle, and the first thing I did was I bought a motorcycle.
And this is not motorbike. This is not conducive to good motorbike riding.
No, it's not. But I bought a 450 Honda Rebel, and I had that for a long time before I got Esperanza. So who took me to Panama? But yeah, that's crazy that you knew just right away that biking was for you. And you said you've raced bikes. So on track?
Yeah, on track. And I still do. So I have, back in Sydney, I have a Ducati. It's called a 959. And I take that out to the track. I used to be a lot faster. I found that, as I've gotten a little bit older, my risk profile has changed just a little bit more. I don't kind of throw it quite so aggressively into the corners as I used to. And also, having children, as well, you're kind of a little bit conscious of that. But I love it. I'm not the racer that I would, that I don't do the speeds that I kind of did in the old days. But I love the adrenaline. I love just me and the track, me and the bike. And that intent focus, you can't be anywhere else. When you're on a track on a bike, you look at a blade of grass and you're gone. So, and I love that, it's just that complete absorption with getting better, and the fact that, if you mess up one corner, you have to let that go. It's great life lessons. I can't keep thinking as I'm going into the next corner, that was a bad corner, or I'm going to blow the next corner.
See, that terrifies me. when life and death, are part of the equation, those kinds of things terrify me, like jumping out of a plane. I will not jump out of a plane because I just think there's riding the bike to Panama. To me, that was never life and death. To some people it might be, but to me that wasn't. That I just thought, if I have a map and I have a route and I treat people well, then it's all going to work out fine.
Yeah. And I understand that. And I think, when we talked about it earlier, I certainly kind of came into the trip with a philosophy that if I treated everyone the way I want to be treated, that would be the energy. But in terms of life or death, I think everybody has a different threshold in terms of what they consider to be extreme. And to the majority of people that have never ridden a motorbike, you going to Panama, I kind of find that extreme because, I was riding around North America. How hard can it be? I wasn't, going through Mongolia with just, with a tent and, and a vegan bar. I could get anything I wanted anywhere. I could speak the language, but you were in Panama, where the language barriers are different. Culture's very different. See, to a lot of people, that's the absolute in extreme.
Yeah. And to me, it was natural because I'd been traveling for so many years and I had been exposed to so many other cultures that, like I said, my biggest fear was just dropping the bike at the gas station.
I'm with you on that one.
Wasn't anything else beyond that. Hey, you mentioned a vegan bar. Let's talk a minute about Rich Roll, because before we started recording, we talked about Rich Roll. For those who don't know, he's a podcaster. He's a ultra endurance athlete, runner, swimmer, biker. And he also happens to live on a plant-based diet. And I remember I saw the cover of him. I don't know if it was in GQ or Men's Journal or something.
I think he was a big spread on GQ.
Yeah, I think that's the first time I had heard of him, where just this really beautiful body, his torso.
Amazing.
Maybe I'm making this up totally, but that's how I remember it.
No, you're not making it up. I remember
very
the photo.
Beautiful man on the cover, and it said, a vegan or plant-based diet, and I thought that's not possible. And I've been vegetarian for a long time. I've been vegetarian, pescatarian, vegetarian since 1990. And then I saw this, and I thought, I thought, oh my gosh, here's this guy doing all these crazy athletic things and he's eating completely plant-based. I asked to myself, like everybody does, how do you get your protein? Yeah, exactly. I've since learned all about that. And you had mentioned not only that Rich Roll is kind of I don't know if you want to call it a mentor, but in some ways, you know, when you listen to what other people are doing, they do become your mentors, but he's a role model.
Absolutely.
And that you had been a vegetarian, but then you realized that you could also go vegan. What was that process for you?
Well, it's very similar to yours. I mean, I'd been a vegetarian, kind of pescatarian for since I was 15. And for me, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was just I hated the taste of meat. And, you know, I came from a very, you know, traditional Australian meat and 3 vegetable family. One of the vegetables always being mashed potato. And I had slowly, I hated the taste of meat. It was feeding my dog under the table. When my dog finally put on about 3 kilos, eventually my mum went, this has got to stop. So she wasn't comfortable with it, but I became a vegetarian. And then, like you, got into, you know, to kind of more endurance feats. And so I figured that I needed to obviously keep a high level of protein. And as much as I hated it, I ate fish and egg whites and protein powder and hated it with a passion, but, you know, was under the misconception that I needed huge amounts of protein if I was going to do long distance. When I moved to Vancouver, I was fortunate enough to come across Brendan Brazier, who started the vegan protein brand.
Yeah, right. And his book, I think, is called Thrive.
Yeah, it is. It's Thrive. So I came across Brendan, and he actually is from Vancouver, and I saw him speak and was just incredibly impressed. And that started me thinking, and at the same time, I read Rich Roll's book, Finding Ultra. And the kind of the backstory for Rich is that he was a 39-year-old, very, very overweight corporate lawyer who just about had a heart attack putting his kids to bed one night and literally just overnight went, that's it, everything changes, became an ultra endurance athlete and changed plant-based overnight. And so kind of the more I read and learned from Rich and his guests and reading his book, you know, I suddenly realized that actually being plant-based was an option, and that you didn't need to kind of, you know, to eat egg whites until they came out your ears or, you know.
Or containers of Chobani yogurt, which is what I lived on.
It was just disgusting. And so I made the decision to go plant-based about 8 years ago and haven't looked back. And I love it. And it's interesting because it's my transition has as well. I mean, as it was a taste thing initially for me, but it's, you know, I guess as I've kind of stepped into being vegan and being plant-based more and more, it has become more of a conscious decision for me as well. It is really interesting. I live in a household where my husband and 2 sons are probably 3 of the biggest meat eaters, you know, known to man. They are great. I mean, you don't get anywhere by preaching. So for me, it's about, you know, by example. And I ask them to watch things like Cowspiracy and What the Health, and which they do very kindly with me and respectfully. And then they'll get up and you know, have a steak sandwich. But I think, you know, for me, it's about, it's, you know, it works for me. I believe in it strongly. I believe in it. I believe in the power of plant-based for our own health and what it does. You know, nearly 60, I'm just about to embark on, you know, start training for an ultra. And I can do that because I can get up every morning and I can do everything that my body wants to do.
And you don't have the inflammation that you had, possibly had. I don't know that you know that for sure, but that a lot of people do have because they're not eating as healthy. What ultra are you planning?
Well, I actually just want to start. Whistler Ironman just finished last weekend. And so I, you know, just want to kind of get that one under my belt first. So, I mean, I've done tries, but I've never done Ironman. So I'm kind of thinking that I'll do Ironman first. So I literally have just kind of worked out the training plan for that over the next 12 months with a view to in 2020, then kind of stepping up and doing ultra.
So that's the end of July?
Yeah, end of July.
Okay. Maybe I'll join you for that.
Deal. Okay. We're on.
Yeah, that would be fun.
But for me, I mean, it's just, you know, at this age, I can do anything I want. You know, and I love that ability to get up in the morning, to feel amazing, to know that I'm putting incredibly good fuel into my body. And I can only use, I've just got an N of one, an experience of one. And for me, it works.
Works for you. Yeah. The interesting thing for me was that I had been veering towards this plant-based diet. And I think I'm going on 4 years into it. And I'm not completely. I'm 95% because every once in a while there's a croissant that passes over my lips. But I will tell you what I learned a few months ago is I had series of tests done, blood and urine tests from a sports nutritionist. And I found that I'm severely allergic to casein, which is in dairy. Yeah. And eggs. So is it in eggs? It's in dairy and milk.
Certainly all dairy.
Yeah. So now I have an excuse. Now I just think, you know what? You shouldn't even have that croissant. Look for an alternative because that's not even good for your body's having to fight. Even though I wasn't anaphylactic or I wasn't going into having hives or rashes or anything. At least now I know my body's having to work harder because I've got antibodies working towards getting it out of my system. Yeah. So,
but it is one of those things. I mean, I think we need to be really careful sometimes when we're vegan and plant-based because I think we can become so militant that we actually turn people off. And so, so for me, it's with my boys. It's like every time you choose a plant-based meal, it's a better choice. And they're getting there.
Yeah. I want to say I've stopped kind of preaching about it, but I do every once in a while. It does still kind of come out because I just think come on, I know you'd feel better if you did that, but you just can't change people. So the other thing that we were talking about earlier too that I want to bring up, and maybe you have some suggestions, is just we were talking about kind of women in podcasting and why I started this podcast. Because I'm a big Rich Roll fan and I'm a fan of some other, it turns out a lot of the podcasts that I listen to are actually male hosts.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't know why that is. And I do kind of think about that. I think one of the things is that I don't think that there are enough women podcasters who are having long form conversations that turn out to be really in depth. And that's why I started the podcast, because I want to have those conversations. I want to be able to listen to other women and have these deeper conversations. But I think even Rich Roll, as fantastic as he is, he talks about needing more women role models, but I don't think he has enough on his podcast. I feel like there's got to be more women out there with fascinating stories who can provide that in-depth thing. But do you find any yourself? Have you found any kind of the long form?
No, I really don't. And I think part of the challenge is that, again, and I, as you know, I'm a great supporter of Rich Roll, but I think he's got to the point now where the kind of people that he has are so kind of in that top 2% band. And I think, and when he talks to women, they are, for example, they're people like, Danica Patrick, who, is the only
race
NASCAR
car
driver. Or people that have done incredible athletic feats, as professional climbers
Huffington.
And things. Yeah, Arianna Huffington talking about sleep. So he's kind of talking to the top 1%. And in a way, it does us a disservice because you kind of think, well, I can't be that. And I think what's missing for women podcast is exactly what you do, which is just normal people doing extraordinary things. I don't think as women, we often give ourselves credit for the things that we do. And I don't think we often see them as extraordinary. You don't see running 4 marathons in 4 days as being extraordinary because that's just what you do.
And I point to other people who are running 5 marathons in 5 days or who are doing something far more extreme than that.
Yeah.
So there's always somebody who's doing something more.
And that's the challenge because, number one, we don't see is what we do is extraordinary. And everything that we do is extraordinary. And number two, as women, I think we're notorious for just always comparing ourselves to the next person and never feeling quite that we match up. I personally spent a lot of time kind of having to stop myself saying, but what I'm perfect as I am and I'm, and what I do is just great. Because there's always someone that's done a bigger motorbike tour or they've done it harder or they've, and I think, we just do ourselves such a disservice when we're continually playing in that spot rather than saying, you know what, this is pretty cool. What I do is pretty cool. Whatever pretty cool is for us. And I think, when you get people like Rich Roll that only are looking at the top percent of, incredible achievers, but if you can talk about, normal people doing amazing stuff in a day-to-day life, that actually then gives you more experience and more inspiration for everyone else to kind of step up and, and number one, acknowledge what they're doing and number two, to talk about it more.
I have a lot of mixed thoughts about that. One is that as I examine why I do that and maybe kind of play down the 4 marathons in 4 days, I think part of it is just being humble because I do see other people who are doing far crazier things. Of course, there's a part of me that thinks like, hey, That's kind of cool. Yeah, like if you could see my face, I'm kind of,
She's
smirking a
doing
little
that.
bit.
Yeah, that's
like,
cool.
Yeah, I know that's kind of cool. And I drop that, in cocktail conversation. That's kind of a fun thing. Usually John's like my great kind of straight man for that. He's like, well, you know what she's doing. And then the conversation goes like that. But I kind of play it down because I want to be humble. I don't want to walk into a room and go, hey, check
me out.
Yeah, exactly. But I think you've hit upon something. And I think, again, with this podcast is being able to bring women on to talk about those sorts of things. And I've had one woman in particular who came in and she said to me, privately, like, I don't really know why I'm here. I'm really trying to, I'm trying to get myself out there more because my company wants me to do more speaking gigs. So this is a stretch for me. So I'm trying to be bold and trying to make it a stretch. So, we just kind of reframed the conversation a little bit so she didn't feel so awkward about it. But, what she does is pretty cool. I won't out her, but what she does is pretty cool. And then I just spoke to a woman yesterday who I am going to kind of out her because I don't think she'll mind. So there's this thing called the Four Deserts.
Oh, I know. You're going to do it. I was so going to do it. Oh, my gosh. I'm so impressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Four Deserts, hopefully listeners may have heard me talk about this before. It's 150 miles over 6 days in 4 different deserts around the world. So Antarctica, Atacama in Chile.
Sahara.
Yeah, it's actually, they've changed it. So I have to start letting people know it's a little bit different. So it's Namibia. It's actually the desert in Namibia. And then the Gobi. And she happens to spend part of her time here in Seattle. She's a doctor. She's a volunteer doctor for that. So she's been going to these since I think for the last 4 or 5 years. She's been going to at least one a year, and her husband's the head doctor on these things. So I get to have her on the podcast, which I'm so excited about. And she said, what I do really isn't very interesting. I don't really know what I'm going to talk about. And I said, look, just indulge me.
Yeah.
Let me be selfish and have you in here just so I can talk and learn about what the 4 deserts are. And you can talk about that and then people can learn about it more. So just kind of reframing it. But here's somebody who goes off once a year into the desert, volunteers her time for, maybe I'm going to just guess 6 to 8 days.
Yeah, it is.
Helping other people. That's amazing in itself. And she's a surgeon and she works with athletes. She's down in Bend, Oregon, part of the time because there's a lot of athletes down there. But she was totally self-deprecating as well. But that's the kind of thing, like you said, those are the kinds of stories that people need to hear because it makes things, I think it makes things more accessible to one thing. Like, on the one hand, Sue, you are just like, you're an executive, you're a former business executive, a mom, a wife, 2 kids. You're an average person. Yet you got on a motorcycle and you rode around, the Pacific Northwest for 3 months on a friggin' 1100, BMW. Yeah. Huge motorcycle, which is parked out back here. That's how I know. So on this big motorcycle, which is also pretty phenomenal, so there's that kind of, yes, I'm an average person, but yeah, kind of did something that was kind of cool.
I think the other thing with women is, and it comes back to kind of, my experience in corporate. Whenever I got a new promotion, and it's a generality, but, certainly my experience was working with colleagues that were male. If they got a promotion, they didn't doubt for a minute that they couldn't do that job. I could be looking at them thinking, how are you going to do this? You've got none of the experience. The majority of my colleagues would step into that role completely fearlessly with the absolute belief and commitment that they had everything it took to do that job. The converse was was for me and my female colleagues who with even more experience would be terrified going into that job saying, I'm just not sure I've got what it takes.
Do you think that this is like Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In? I don't know if you've read that, but do you think that addresses kind of that issue, or how do we overcome that?
A lot of it actually depends on how women work with women because, I've been very fortunate. I've had one female mentor in my career who was just exceptional and who absolutely gave me, more confidence to be able to step into that space. But unfortunately, a lot of women that I found in the corporate world aren't like that. There's a unhealthy competition in lots of environments that actually helps to kind of foster that. Men believe that they believe that because they're surrounded by men that believe it. I think when women are in an environment where they're surrounded by women that actually believe that we can do amazing things no matter what it takes, and to put a value on that as well, then I think eventually you start to get a shift. But whilst we're not supportive of each other in that environment, and you know, I must admit, I'm not a radical feminist. I believe, you know, that the best person for the best job. But I think, you know, we do have a responsibility to take better care of each other as women and to be more supportive of each other as women.
Well, you grew up with a brother.
I did.
And you grew up, is it fair to say that you were a tomboy? Like, would you
Pretty
use
much,
that? I don't know.
yep.
I don't know if you use that.
We do.
Okay, I didn't know if you use that term.
Yeah.
See, I grew up with 3 brothers.
Yeah, the ultimate tomboy.
Right. So, and they're 7, 9, and 11 years older than I am. So, in a sense, I grew up kind of as an only child because they were out of the house by the time I was like 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
You know, they were leaving the house. And I don't have that same feeling of competitiveness that I think some women have, the cattiness. I was not brought up in that environment at all.
You're very lucky.
And so I guess so, because, you know, when people, because I do a lot of women only tours, and the feedback that I get from someone who hasn't been on one of my trips is, gosh, there's got to be a lot of cattiness and people vying for the right seat and that kind of thing. And I think, no, there's not. And I think part of it is that's because that's the way I lead and set it up, because it never occurred to me that that should be part of it, because I wasn't in that environment. And when I hear from friends about how they grew up with their sisters, and there was the pettiness and the judgment and the clothes and the nails and everything had to be just right, I have no sense of that at all.
You've got no reference for that.
No.
But it exists.
Well, did you grow up with that at all?
No, you know, I didn't. I mean, my brother and I were very close, but I didn't. But you know what? I still experience it on the road. It's been really interesting for me on the road being a female bike rider. There's an incredible bond with people that ride on the road, you know, and the majority of people that are out there are men. So I kind of call it the biking brotherhood. You know, no matter where you are, you know, somebody pulls up alongside you with a bike, we all get off. We're like dogs sniffing each other's tails. At first it's like, okay, so how fast does that go? What's it brake horsepower? You know, so we kind of get all of that out of the way and then we tell stories. And being on a bike is an incredible leveler because it doesn't matter. I mean, I was on the track one day with 2 guys. One, you know, they were in either side of garages with me, and we've been best buddies all day, never met each other. At the end of the day, we kind of, you know, so what do you do? And one guy says, well, you know, I'm a financial investment banker. And, you know, I talked about me. And I said to the other guy on my right, and what do you do? And he said, oh, you can see my work from here. I said, really? Where? He said, it's the garbage dump. I'm the garbage collector. I'm the trash collector. Such a great leveler. But what I found, and so the brotherhood are incredibly protective of you when you ride. And the only times I've experienced kind of challenges with the brotherhood is when it's been the sisterhood. And I found that really disappointing. You know, maybe it wasn't a gender thing. Maybe these just kind of weren't nice people. Maybe it was just, you know, it was just
they were
unlucky.
Harley riders.
They were Harley riders. They were Harley riders. And, you know, there's a slight difference between the Harley riders and the rest of us.
There are. Although I have really dear friends who are Harley riders. So I will. And my brother's a big Harley rider and his buddies are Harley riders.
Oh, we'll still talk to them.
I know. Yeah. So there are good ones out there. But when you do, that is a clique. That is definitely a clique that's a little bit different.
But I came across a BMW rider, a girl riding a, you know, touring bike. And she was just aggressive and rude. And, you know, it was just kind of disappointing because I, you know, kind of bounced over like an excited puppy. Wow, look at us, 2 girls on the road. And she was like, yeah, sit down, go away. But, you know, as I said, maybe that's not a gender thing. Maybe she just wasn't, you know, that just nicer person.
Or she had a bad day or something.
She had a bad day.
So your book is out. What do you want people to take away from your book? What are some of the kind of big picture ideas? If we didn't touch upon it, I don't think we did, because we had a conversation about just the difference between, you used a beautiful phrase when we spoke on the phone, and it was inspiring to action, which I just thought was so great, because I talk about that too, that you can inspire people, but big deal, they're scrolling through Instagram. And, you know, and you read a quote, or there's a quote on the wall on the poster, and it's inspiring, but you really want to find some kind of aspiration. You know, you want to move someone to action.
I pulled into a gas station. I'm trying to remember where it was. I think it's probably in Oregon somewhere. And it was really hot. And as I was kind of fueling my car up, and I love fueling my bike, and I love a good gas station because you get such cross community. And I was just filling it up, kind of watching. And I kind of looked to the side and I didn't realize that I was actually being observed. And it was really hot. I pulled my bike into the shade just to drink some water. And this young girl came across and she drove her car over. And she was so tiny, she could barely see over the steering wheel. She was just this tiny, ethereal little spirit. And she got out of the car and she said, can I sit with you? Can we talk? And we talked for a lot of time. And we talked about the fact that, you have the most in-depth conversations with people at a gas station. It's incredible. Within minutes, we were talking about fear. She said she'd always wanted to ride, but was terrified. And we kind of talked about, how fear can hold you back, and how being brave doesn't mean you're not frightened. It means that you acknowledge the fear, but you just kind of keep stepping forward. And so we talked about, she said, oh, you're so inspiring. And we had this conversation. I said, yeah, but you know what? Thank you. But if I'm not helping you to act, then the inspiration is it's lovely, but it doesn't change anything. So I said, so you want to ride? What's the next best step you can do to actually help you ride? And she said, well, I could, take my test. I could, I went, great, let's do that. So she made a commitment to me on the spot that, she and her brother had a bike that she was going to get him, and it was just a farm bike, a 250, that she would teach her to ride, and she would go for her license. And we're still in touch now.
Oh, you are? Oh, good.
And she's riding.
Oh, that's great.
So,
well, you asked of her just to make that next step.
Yeah.
And that's the big deal.
Yes. Yeah. And it wasn't, and I said, don't plan on riding, an S1 right now. Don't, you're not looking to ride a bike. You're just riding to get on a bike and learn. And then, plan the destination, head towards the destination, but the next steps, will kind of unfold, and just take the next best step, and then it'll be the next best step, and then the next best step. And so we're still in contact, and she's riding. So, so to me, that's I guess one of the core messages in the book is be inspired, and that's fantastic, but make the change. Take the action, take any action, even if it's just the smallest step to kind of stepping forward into recreating what it is that you want to take. And it doesn't need to be a huge grand gesture. It can be a tiny step, but it needs to be a step.
So this is the Be Bold podcast, and I think this is a great way to kind of wrap it up with that, with those aspiring, actionable words that you've left. With the Be Bold podcast, what does it mean for you to be bold?
I think, certainly the old me used to always conjure up a physical activity. For me, my safe place was doing something that was kind of dangerous and outrageous and scary.
Like racing.
I do kind of dive with sharks and, do kind of out there things. But that was a boldness that was requiring me to fuel a gap in my life. I think for me, being bold right now is being comfortable with myself. And it's also about, we talked about control. It's about kind of surrendering to the unknown. In the past, I've always wanted to know every single step. And it takes bravery to go, you know what? I'm just going to see what unfolds. I'm going to keep moving forward, but I'm going to kind of surrender to the unknown and see what unfolds, because I can't necessarily imagine all the amazing things that could happen. And if I plan it to the nth degree, there's a chance that I'm going to miss out on something just incredible. So make the plan, keep moving forward, but always be open to the wild cards that come and not try and control them. That's what being bold means for me.
Are you reading any books right now?
I am a voracious reader, and my favorite book that I've read it before, and I just wanted to go back and retouch on it. It's called the Book of Joy.
Who wrote that?
So that's Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama.
Oh my gosh! Of course, that book just came out about a year ago, right? Yeah.
And it just makes me smile. I was really just so blessed at my time in Qantas. I got to spend 20 minutes with the Dalai Lama.
Where was that? Oh, when you were
Sydney.
With, oh,
yeah.
Gosh.
And it was just an amazing experience. I was quite in awe of being obviously the Dalai Lama, and he held my hands and he said, "Let's gossip." And I sat with 20 minutes with the Dalai Lama. And this book is it's beautiful. It's really simple. And so it is literally, what does it take to have joy in your life by, two incredible men. So that's my read at the moment.
How did that? I can't let that just pass by. How did that meeting with the Dalai Lama come about?
I mean, Qantas was Qantas actually had brought him to Australia, and so as part of, so they were the major carrier, and as part of that, he very kindly said that he would sit with a few people and talk.
What'd you talk about?
He literally held my hand and we gossiped, and he told me stories about his life in India, and he has this it didn't matter what he told me. I was just mesmerized by this, by the pure joy and content and love that just kind of emanates from him. But, my favorite story was telling me that he used to try and sneak out. So he has a very highly guarded place in India where he lives, and he's surrounded by his mentors, and he waits till they all go to sleep, and at 3:00 in the morning he burrows his way out, he finds a way out and just walks around the town because he wants to be in the real world, he wants to see it. And then when he comes back, when his mind has found that he's been out, he gets into trouble and he goes, but he wags his little finger and he's so cheeky. And he's just an incredible, it was one of the most
That's a sweet
amazing
story.
experiences for me.
Where can people find you? Are you on social media?
I am. So I have Facebook. I'm on Sue Hollis. On Instagram, I'm at Sue Hollis _ and my website is just SueHollis.com.
Great. And I will link to all of that in the show notes. And then people can pick up your book, Riding Raw, The Journey from Empty to Full, in bookstores, on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yep.
So in all of those places.
Yeah, absolutely.
So wonderful. Anything else you want to wrap things up with? Anything that we didn't cover or you'd like to include?
I think probably just the second biggest lesson for me, and it was a huge one, was that it's really, it's great to celebrate head success. And by head success, I mean, kind of financial security, careers, jobs, all those things that we kind of hold as traditional measures of success. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with searching for those, so long as they're not the things that define us. We are not our business card. We are not our house. We are not our cars. So enjoy head success. But, for me, the real joy has been kind of finding the heart success. So kind of understanding who I am.
In the heart, not hard.
Heart.
In
the heart.
Yeah, the heart success. Okay, just wanted to
it's
clarify.
It's the translation of the accent.
Yeah, yes, I know. Yeah,
But,
so finding the heart success.
Yeah, finding
so
heart
what makes you
success.
happy, joyful?
Absolutely, and what lets you contribute back into the world. So that's the biggest lesson for me.
That's beautiful. We'll end on that. So thank you so much for coming down. You rode. I know it was tough. You had to ride your
excuse
motorcycle.
to get on my voodoo.
I know you had to come down on your motorcycle.
That's
thanks
a pleasure.
thanks for coming down from Whistler, and hopefully we'll get to spend some more time together in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks
Great.
so much.
Thanks.
Beth. Cheers.
How much did you love that conversation? Isn't she just so charming? You should have seen her pulling out of our driveway on Voodoo. There she was on her tippy toes, backing out. She was just so cute. I've linked to her social media accounts and her book in the show notes, so check those out at BeBoldPodcast.com. I've mentioned before that I'm always on the lookout for new podcast guests. If you know of anyone or you yourself would be a good fit, simply fill out the guest submission form on the BeBoldPodcast.com website. I only record in person and often record in Seattle, but as you know, I travel a lot, and that gives me the chance to meet up with people on the road. And I'm actually headed to Kauai this week and New York City at the end of the month, so those are just two locations where I'll be bringing my equipment and recording. If you know any incredible ladies in one of those destinations, be sure to hook me up. You can email me at beth@beboldpodcast.com. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook. I'm WanderGal on Instagram and Wanderluster on Twitter. You can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustandlipstick.com. Sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. I often have giveaways for some pretty awesome travel gear. I've got some things lined up in the coming months, which I think you'll really dig. So if you're a subscriber, you'll get information about that. Hey, if you want to travel with me, you can find out about the tours I lead at wandertours.com. I've got full tours to Machu Picchu and the Galapagos later this year, but let me know if you're interested in those destinations or any other place in South America, and I'll put you on a wait list. I've got a little space on our women-only South India tour in February and a couple of spots on our co-ed trip to Papua New Guinea next August. And I'm also working on details for Ireland that'll be the fall of 2019. Ladies, don't forget to join that Be Bold Facebook group. It's at facebook.com/groups/BeBoldGroup. You're going to love the positivity, encouragement, and support from that community. Thanks, as always, for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.